She was invited by her millionaire ex-husband to be humiliated at Christmas, but she arrived with the twins he never knew existed. The cream-colored envelope felt like poison between Annalise Vance's fingers. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she stood in the doorway of her modest apartment, watching her 5-year-old twins build a fortress from couch cushions across the room. Serenity's laugh, bright and musical, rang through the space as she placed another pillow on top. Malik, more serious and deliberate, adjusted the structure's foundation with the precision of a tiny architect. They had no idea their mother's world was collapsing. Before we continue with Annalise's impossible situation, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you who has subscribed to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. We've just crossed 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. If you're enjoying these stories of wealth, power, and the complicated lives of the ultra-rich, please hit that share button and spread the word. Now, let's get back to the invitation that would change everything. The envelope had arrived that morning, delivered by a courier in a black suit who actually waited, for her to sign for it, as if she might refuse. The return address was embossed in gold lettering, Cole Estate, Pacific Heights, San Francisco. Henry's address, her ex-husband's address. Annalise moved to the kitchen, keeping the twins in her peripheral vision while she read the card inside for the 3rd time. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Mr. Henry Cole cordially invites Miss Annalise Vance to an evening celebration at Cole Estate. Saturday, June 15th, 7 p.m. Cocktail attire required. Please reply required within 48 hours. Beneath the formal invitation, handwritten in Henry's distinctive angular script, was a personal message. We have unfinished business to discuss. I trust you'll make the right decision about attending. For the children's sake, of course. For the children's sake. The words made her stomach turn. Henry didn't know about the children. At least, that's what she'd believed for 5 years. She'd left San Francisco when she was barely 2 months pregnant, fled to Seattle before she started showing, before anyone in Henry's circle could notice. She'd changed her last name back to Vance, found work as a bookkeeper for small businesses, and built a quiet life far from the glittering world of galas and charity functions and people who smiled while calculating your net worth. "Mama, look," Serenity called out, waving from inside their blanket fort. "We made a castle." Annalise forced a smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Malik poked his head out, his dark eyes assessing. "Are you okay, Mama? You look sad." Those eyes. God, those were Henry's eyes. Intelligent, searching, always analyzing. Malik had inherited his father's sharp mind, his ability to read people. Serenity had Henry's smile, the one that could light up a room, though thankfully she'd gotten Annalise's warm heart instead of Henry's calculated charm. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking about work stuff." The lie tasted bitter, but what else could she say? That she was holding an invitation from the man she'd once loved with everything in her, the man who'd destroyed that love so completely she'd run away rather than face him. That she was terrified he'd somehow discovered their existence. Annalise set the invitation on the kitchen counter and gripped the edge of the sink. Her reflection in the window above showed a woman who looked older than her 32 years. The stress of single parenthood, of working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, had etched lines around her eyes and mouth. Her auburn hair, once professionally styled and highlighted, now hung in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a faded sweater instead of the designer dresses that used to fill her closet. This was her life now, simple, safe, separate from Henry and everything he represented. Except Henry was reaching across the distance she'd created, his words on that card like hooks pulling her back. "We have unfinished business to discuss." What business could they possibly have? Their divorce had been finalized 6 years ago. The settlement had been clean. She'd walked away with nothing, wanting nothing that tied her to him. She'd signed papers agreeing never to speak to the press about their marriage, about the Cole family, about any of it. She'd kept that agreement faithfully. So why now? Why was he contacting her after all this time? The answer came to her slowly, coldly, like ice water in her veins. He knew. Somehow, Henry knew about the twins. Annalise's breathing quickened. She pressed her palm against her chest, trying to calm the panic rising there. It wasn't possible. She'd been so careful. She'd had the babies in Seattle under her maiden name. Their birth certificates listed no father. She'd avoided social media, kept their photos private, stayed away from anyone who might recognize her from her old life. But Henry Cole was one of the wealthiest men in California. His family's tech empire was worth billions. If he'd wanted to find her, if he'd wanted to dig into her life, he had the resources to do exactly that. The question was why he'd waited 5 years to make contact. Annalise turned back to watch her children. Serenity was now dancing inside the fort, her blonde curls bouncing. Malik had found his favorite book and was reading quietly in the corner, his little face scrunched in concentration. They were happy. They were healthy. They had a mother who loved them more than life itself. They didn't have a father, but they didn't seem to miss what they'd never known. When they asked about him, and they had occasionally with the innocent curiosity of children, she told them the truth, that their father lived far away, that the relationship hadn't worked out, but that it had nothing to do with how much they were loved. What she didn't tell them was that their father was a man who viewed people as assets or liabilities. That he'd told her, 3 months into their marriage, that love was an inefficient emotion, and that their relationship was really a strategic alliance between families. When she'd confessed she wanted children someday, he'd laughed and said he had no intention of producing expensive distractions. That final conversation had happened 2 weeks before she found him in his study with Victoria Laurent, his head of marketing, both of them in various states of undress. The memories still stung, even after all these years. Not because she mourned the loss of Henry. That man had never really existed except in her imagination. She mourned the loss of who she'd been before him, the trusting young woman who believed in love and happy endings. Henry's betrayal had taught her that in the world of the wealthy everything was transactional, including marriage. She picked up the invitation again, studying the handwritten message. The phrasing was classic Henry, courteous on the surface, threatening underneath. I trust you'll make the right decision. What was the right decision in his mind? To come running when he summoned her, to fall back into the pattern of their marriage, where he made demands and she complied. For the children's sake. That phrase was the real weapon. He was letting her know, without explicitly stating it, that he was aware of Malik and Serenity, that whatever this invitation was really about, it concerned them. Annalise felt a surge of protective fury. Henry had given up any right to those children when he'd made it clear he never wanted them. She'd built this life alone, scraped by on modest wages, gone without sleep, and proper meals to make sure her babies had everything they needed. She'd been there for every fever, every nightmare, every milestone. Where had Henry been? Living in his mansion, running his empire, probably cycling through a series of beautiful, ambitious women who didn't realize they were just ornaments in his perfectly curated life. But anger wouldn't help her now. She needed to think clearly. If she ignored the invitation, what would happen? Would Henry come to Seattle? Would he use his lawyers and his money to insert himself into their lives? He had resources she couldn't begin to match. If he wanted custody, or even visitation rights, he could bury her in legal fees until she had nothing left. If she attended, she'd be walking into his territory, playing his game by his rules. Henry never did anything without a strategy. This invitation was a chess move, and she couldn't see enough of the board to know what he was really planning. The twins' laughter pulled her from her thoughts. Serenity was now wearing a blanket as a cape, declaring herself queen of the castle. Malik had abandoned his book to join in, building additional fortifications with solemn dedication. They deserved better than this. They deserved a life free from manipulation and power games. They deserved to grow up without the weight of the Cole name and fortune pressing down on them. But maybe that choice was no longer hers to make. Annalise looked at the please reply deadline on the invitation. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether to step back into the world she'd fled, to face the man who'd broken her heart and taught her that love was just another commodity to be bought and sold. A phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. The invitation is just the beginning, Annalise. We should discuss the twins' future, their real future. H. Her hands stopped shaking. At that moment, something shifted inside her. Fear gave way to clarity. Henry thought he could summon her, threaten her, force her hand by dangling vague warnings about their children's welfare. He'd forgotten who she'd become in the years since their divorce. She wasn't the naive young woman he'd married anymore. She was a mother. And mothers, when backed into corners, became forces of nature. Annalise picked up her phone and began typing her response. Her fingers moved with steady determination across the screen, each word chosen carefully. She would not let him see her panic. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how terrified she was. I'll attend. But understand this, Henry. Those children are mine. I've raised them, protected them, and loved them for 5 years without any help from you. Whatever you think you want, whatever plan you've concocted, remember that I know exactly who you are. I've seen behind the polished exterior, and I will fight with everything I have to protect them from becoming pawns in whatever game you're playing. See you Saturday. A. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. His response came within seconds. I wouldn't expect anything less. That fire is what I always admired about you, even when I was too blind to appreciate it properly. Come at 6 p.m., 1 hour before the other guests. We'll talk privately first. And Annalise? I'm not the enemy here, not anymore. H. Annalise stared at the message, trying to decode its meaning. Not the enemy anymore. What was that supposed to mean? That he'd been her enemy before and had now changed his mind? That he had some new strategy that required cooperation instead of confrontation? She didn't trust it. Couldn't trust it. Henry Cole had taught her that his words were weapons, carefully chosen to manipulate and control, but she also recognized that she had no choice but to play this out. If he knew about the twins, and his messages made it clear he did, then hiding was no longer an option. She had to face him, had to find out what he wanted, and had to be prepared to fight for her children's future. Mama, are you coming to play? Serenity's voice broke through her thoughts. Her daughter stood at the kitchen entrance, her little face hopeful. Of course, baby. Annalise set down her phone and scooped Serenity into her arms. Tell me all about this castle you've built. As Serenity chatted enthusiastically about the architectural features of their blanket fort, Annalise held her close and breathed in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. She looked over at Malik, still carefully arranging pillows, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, the way it always did when he was focused. These were her children, her responsibility, her world, and she would walk through fire before she let Henry Cole or anyone else hurt them. Saturday was 4 days away, 4 days to prepare herself mentally and emotionally for seeing the man who'd shattered her ability to trust. 4 days to figure out her strategy, to anticipate his moves, to steel herself against whatever charm or threats he might deploy. 4 days to remember who she was now, not the broken woman who'd fled San Francisco, but the strong, capable mother who'd built a life from nothing. She'd survived poverty, exhaustion, and single parenthood. She'd built a successful business while raising twins. She'd created a home filled with love and security. Henry Cole might have money and power and resources she couldn't match. But she had something more important. 5 years of being their mother. 5 years of knowing every fear, every dream, every quirk and preference. 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and homework help and unconditional love. That connection couldn't be bought or negotiated or strategized into existence, and that would be her advantage. As the afternoon faded into evening, Annalise played with her children, made them dinner, supervised bath time, and read them stories before bed. Every ordinary moment felt precious now, weighted with the knowledge that their simple life was about to become complicated. After they were asleep, she stood in their bedroom doorway for a long time, watching them breathe. Serenity slept sprawled across her bed, covers kicked off, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. Malik was curled into a tight ball, his expression serious even in sleep. "I won't let him take you," she whispered into the darkness. "I won't let him turn you into miniature versions of himself. I won't let him teach you that people are just assets and love is just strategy. You're going to grow up knowing you're valued for who you are, not what you can provide." She didn't sleep well that night. Her dreams were full of courtrooms and custody battles and Henry's cold eyes judging her and finding her wanting. But when she woke the next morning to Serenity climbing into her bed, chattering about a dream she'd had about flying horses, Annalise felt her resolve strengthen. She had 4 days to prepare, 4 days to become ready for war. Because that's what this was, no matter what pretty words Henry wrapped it in. A war for her children's souls. And Annalise Vance had already proven she could survive anything. Now she just had to prove she could win. 7 years ago, Annalise had believed in fairy tales. She'd been 25, working as an event coordinator for Preston and Associates, one of San Francisco's premier luxury event planning firms. Her job was to make other people's dreams come true, orchestrating million-dollar weddings, corporate galas and charity fundraisers for clients who thought nothing of spending more on flowers than most people earned in a year. She'd been good at it too. Detail-oriented, creative, able to soothe anxious brides and demanding CEOs with equal skill. Her boss, Margaret Preston, had called her the girl with the golden touch. That golden touch had extended to the Cole Technology Summit, a 3-day conference showcasing innovations in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Annalise had spent 6 months planning every detail, from the keynote speakers to the signature cocktails served at the evening receptions. Henry Cole had been scheduled to deliver the opening address. She'd seen his photographs in business magazines, of course. Everyone in San Francisco knew the Cole family. His grandfather had founded Cole Technologies in the 1960s, building it from a small electronics company into a global powerhouse. Henry, at 30 years old, had just taken over as CEO from his father, and the business world was watching to see if he could maintain the family legacy. Nothing had prepared her for meeting him in person. He'd arrived early to inspect the venue, flanked by assistants and security. Annalise had been adjusting the lighting on the main stage when he'd walked up behind her. "The blue filter washes out the speaker's face," he'd said, his voice deep and assured. "You'll want something warmer. Amber, maybe, with a subtle backlight." She turned, ready to politely explain that she knew her job, and found herself looking into the most intense dark eyes she'd ever seen. He was tall, over 6 feet, with perfectly styled black hair and features that belonged on a movie screen rather than in a boardroom. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "I'll take that under advisement," she'd managed, trying to keep her voice professional despite her racing heart. Henry had smiled then, not the polished corporate smile she'd seen in his press photos, but something genuine and warm. "You're the event coordinator. Annalise Vance, right?" Margaret speaks very highly of you. The fact that he knew her name, that he'd apparently asked about her, had sent a flutter through her chest. I hope the venue meets your expectations, Mr. Cole. Henry, he'd corrected, and it exceeds them. You've thought of everything. Over the next 3 days, he'd found reasons to seek her out. Questions about the schedule that his assistants could have answered. Comments about the food, the decor, the flow of the conference. Each conversation lasted a little longer than the last. On the final night, after the closing gala, he'd found her supervising the clean-up crew. Have dinner with me, he'd said. No preamble, no pretense. She should have said no. She had a strict policy about never getting involved with clients, but Henry wasn't just any client, and the way he looked at her made her feel like the only person in the room. When? She'd asked. Now. Tonight. There's a restaurant I know, the quiet best pasta in the city. That dinner lasted 4 hours. They talked about everything. Her childhood in Oregon, his complicated relationship with his family's expectations, her dreams of maybe starting her own event planning business someday, his vision for where technology was heading in the next decade. He'd been charming, yes, but also surprisingly vulnerable. He told her about the pressure of living up to the Cole name, about how people saw the money and the power, but never the person underneath. She'd felt privileged that he was sharing these things with her, that he trusted her enough to let his guard down. When he'd kissed her goodnight outside her apartment, she'd felt like she was floating. The courtship that followed had been intense and intoxicating. Henry had pursued her with the same focus he brought to his business ventures. Flowers are delivered to her office daily, weekend trips to Napa Valley, to Big Sur, once even to Paris, because she'd mentioned she'd never been. He'd introduced her to a world of private jets and Michelin-starred restaurants, of opera boxes and exclusive gallery openings. But what had really won her heart were the quiet moments, walking through Golden Gate Park on Sunday mornings, cooking dinner together in his penthouse, kitchen, the way he'd listen when she talked about her day as if nothing else mattered. 3 months after that first dinner, he'd proposed on a yacht in the San Francisco Bay, the city lights glittering behind him as he'd knelt with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I've never met anyone like you," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "You see me, Annalise. Not the company, not the name. Just me. Marry me. Build a life with me." She'd said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face, believing with her whole heart that she'd found her person. Looking back now, standing in her small Seattle apartment with his threatening invitation on her counter, she could barely recognize that naive young woman. She'd been so dazzled by the attention, by the romance, by the fantasy of being chosen by Henry Cole, that she'd missed all the warning signs. The wedding had been planned with military precision by Margaret Preston herself, who'd been thrilled that her protégé was marrying into one of San Francisco's most prominent families. 8 months of preparation for a single day that would be covered by society magazines and attended by 500 of the city's elite. Annalise had wanted something smaller, more intimate, but Henry's mother Eleanor had insisted. "The Coles have a certain standard to maintain," Eleanor had explained during their first wedding planning meeting, her smile pleasant but her eyes cold. "This marriage isn't just about you and Henry. It's about the family's reputation." That should have been her first clue. The ceremony had taken place at Grace Cathedral, with reception following at the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom. Annalise had worn a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than her parents' house. Her parents, both schoolteachers from a small Oregon town, had looked overwhelmed by the whole spectacle. Her father had squeezed her hand before walking her down the aisle. "Are you sure about this, Annie? It's not too late to change your mind." "I'm sure, Dad. I love him. Love's important," he'd said quietly. "But so is being yourself. Don't lose who you are trying to fit into his world." She'd kissed his cheek and promised him she wouldn't. Another promise she'd failed to keep. The wedding itself had been beautiful and cold, a performance for the cameras and guests rather than a celebration of love. Eleanor had controlled every detail, from the seating arrangements to the approved list of toasts. Annalise's college friends had been relegated to tables at the back, while business associates and family friends occupied the prime positions. Henry had seemed different that day, more formal, more distant, as if he were playing a role rather than marrying the woman he loved. When they'd had a private moment between photographs, she'd asked if he was okay. "Just tired," he'd said, checking his phone, "and thinking about the merger talks starting next week. Sorry, I know I should be more present." The honeymoon had been 2 weeks in Bali, which should have been romantic but felt oddly hollow. Henry had spent hours each day on conference calls, leaving her to explore alone. When she'd complained, gently, he'd looked genuinely confused. "This is who I am, Annalise. You knew that when you married me. The business doesn't stop just because we're on vacation." She'd tried to adjust, to understand that being married to someone like Henry meant sharing him with his empire, but the distance between them had continued to grow after they returned to San Francisco. They'd moved into Henry's penthouse in Pacific Heights, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. It was beautiful and sterile, decorated by professionals in shades of white and grey. When Annalise had suggested adding some colour, maybe some family photos or personal touches, Eleanor had intervened. "The penthouse was featured in Architectural Digest last year," she said. "We can't have it looking cluttered." Annalise had been expected to quit her job. Eleanor had made it clear that co-wife didn't work. Instead, she was supposed to serve on charity boards, attend luncheons, and support Henry at various social functions. She'd tried to embrace this new role, but she'd felt increasingly like a doll being posed in someone else's vision of the perfect life. The women in Eleanor's social circle were polite but cold, evaluating her clothes, her conversation, her pedigree, and finding her wanting. She was an event planner. She'd overheard one woman whisper at a gallery opening, practically a servant. I don't know what Henry was thinking. Henry himself had become a stranger. The warm, vulnerable man who'd courted her had disappeared, replaced by someone who viewed their marriage as another item on his schedule. They had dinner together twice a week, always at the same time, always with the same polite conversation about his work and her charity activities. Physical intimacy had become routine, scheduled, devoid of passion. 3 months into the marriage, she'd tried to talk to him about it. "I feel like I'm losing myself," she'd admitted one night. "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not working, I don't have real friends here, and we barely talk." Henry had looked up from his laptop with mild irritation. "You're being dramatic. You have everything most women dream of: security, status, access to the best of everything. What more do you want? I want my husband to actually care about me, to see me as more than just another acquisition." His expression had hardened. "I thought you understood what this marriage was. Our families both benefit. Your parents have the financial security I provided. You have the lifestyle and connections you could never have achieved on your own. And I have an appropriate wife to fulfill social obligations. It's a fair arrangement." The word arrangement had hit her like a physical blow. "Is that really how you see our marriage? As a business deal? How else should I see it? Love is an inefficient emotion, Annalise. It clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. What we have is better, a partnership based on mutual advantage." She'd stared at the man she'd married, seeing him clearly for the first time. There was no warmth in his eyes, no affection, just calculation. That night, she'd cried herself to sleep in the guest bedroom, mourning the death of her illusions. If Henry was cold, his mother Eleanor was Arctic. From the beginning, Eleanor had made it clear that Annalise wasn't good enough for the Cole family. The criticisms were never direct. Eleanor was too sophisticated for that, but they were constant and cutting. "That dress is lovely, dear. though perhaps a bit provincial for this evening's event. Let me have my stylist send over some options. Your table manners are adequate, but you hold your wine glass incorrectly. A coal wife should know these things. I've arranged for you to join the symphony board. Try not to embarrass us by revealing how little you know about classical music. Every comment was designed to remind Annalise that she was an outsider, that she would never truly belong in their world, no matter how hard she tried. Eleanor had her own vision of who Henry should have married. Someone like Victoria Laurent, who came from old money, had gone to the right schools, and understood instinctively how to navigate the treacherous waters of high society. Victoria worked as Cole Technologies' head of marketing, and Eleanor made sure to invite her to every family dinner, every company event. She'd seat Victoria next to Henry, praise her accomplishments, draw comparisons that made Annalise feel inadequate. Victoria just closed the deal with the European distributors, Eleanor would say. Such a brilliant mind. Don't you think so, Henry? Henry would agree, smiling at Victoria with more warmth than he ever showed his own wife. Annalise had tried to befriend Victoria at first, thinking maybe they could be allies. But Victoria had looked at her with barely concealed contempt. You must feel so lucky, Victoria had said at one dinner party, her voice sweet as poison. Landing someone like Henry when you have so little to offer. It's quite the Cinderella story. The society women who formed Eleanor's inner circle had followed their leader's example. They'd excluded Annalise from their lunches and shopping trips, spoken to her with patronizing politeness, and made sure she knew she was tolerated rather than welcomed. One woman, Patricia Montgomery, had been particularly cruel. At a charity gala, she'd cornered Annalise by the powder room. We all know why Henry really married you, she'd said, refreshing her lipstick in the mirror. Eleanor told us about the agreement. Your parents were drowning in debt, weren't they? Medical bills? And Henry played the hero, paying everything off in exchange for a wife to fill the position. Smart business, really. You get financial security, he gets someone presentable enough to appear in photographs. Just remember your place, dear. You're an employee, not actually one of us. Annalise had wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Because 2 weeks before the wedding, Henry had indeed paid off her parents' significant medical debt. Her mother's cancer treatment had nearly bankrupted them. At the time, she'd thought it was a generous gesture from the man she loved. Now she understood it had been part of the transaction. The final destruction of her marriage had come on a Tuesday evening in March, 9 months after their wedding. Annalise had returned early from a charity luncheon, cut short by her growing suspicion that she might be pregnant. She'd been feeling nauseous for weeks, exhausted and emotional. Part of her was terrified at the prospect, knowing Henry's views on children, but another part, the part that still hoped their marriage could be saved, thought maybe a baby would change things. She'd entered the penthouse quietly, planning to take a pregnancy test before Henry came home from the office. But she'd heard voices coming from his study, Henry's voice, and a woman's laugh she recognized as Victoria's. The study door had been slightly ajar. She should have announced herself, should have walked in and asked what they were doing. Instead, something made her stop and listen. Your mother's right, Victoria was saying. You should never have married her. She's completely out of her depth. I know, Henry's voice resigned. But the optics were good at the time. The press loved the story. A successful CEO marries a normal girl, proves he's not just another out-of-touch billionaire. It played well with our consumer base. And now? Now she's served her purpose. I'll give it another year, maybe 2, then arrange a quiet divorce, cite irreconcilable differences. That's a long time to wait. Victoria's voice had turned sultry. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? The sound that followed, a kiss, movement, Victoria's soft moan, had been enough. Annalise had backed away from the door, her hand pressed over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She'd made it to the guest bathroom before her legs gave out, collapsing on the floor as the truth crashed over her. Her marriage was a sham, had always been a sham. She wasn't a wife, she was a PR strategy that Henry was already planning to discard, and he was having an affair with Victoria, probably with Eleanor's blessing. Annalise had left the penthouse that afternoon and checked into a hotel. She'd taken the pregnancy test in the sterile bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. 2 pink lines, pregnant, with the child of a man who viewed her as a temporary inconvenience, who was already planning to divorce her, who told her months ago that children were expensive distractions. She'd sat on the bathroom floor, one hand on her still flat stomach, and made a decision. She wouldn't tell him, wouldn't give him the chance to pressure her into terminating the pregnancy or to use her child as another piece in his strategic games. This baby, her baby, would be protected from the Cole family's toxicity. The next morning she'd called a divorce attorney. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Morrison, had listened to Annalise's story with growing concern. "You could fight this," Rebecca had said, "get a much better settlement than you're asking for. You have leverage, the affair, the marriage under false pretenses, your parents' debt being used as coercion." "I don't want his money," Annalise had said firmly. "I just want out. Clean, fast, no strings. What about spousal support? You gave up your career for this marriage." "I'll rebuild my career. I just need to not be connected to him anymore." Rebecca had drawn up the papers. Annalise would walk away with nothing except her personal belongings and her maiden name restored. In exchange, she'd sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement promising never to discuss the marriage, the Cole family, or anything related to Henry. She'd been fine with that. She never wanted to speak about any of them again. Henry had seemed surprised when she'd served him with the papers, but not upset. If anything, he'd looked relieved that she was making it easy for him. They'd met one final time to sign the documents, in a conference room at Rebecca's office. "This is for the best," Henry had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You'll be happier without the pressure of being a Cole. You can go back to your regular life." "I was never really a Cole," she'd replied quietly. "I was just borrowing the name." He nodded, already checking his phone. "My attorney will ensure you have enough to get resettled. Quietly, of course. No need for this to become public." "I don't want your money, Henry." That had made him look up. "Don't be ridiculous. Take the settlement. You'll need it. I don't want anything from you. Just sign the papers." He'd studied her for a long moment, and she'd wondered if he could see the secret she was carrying. But his expression had remained distant, uninterested. "Suit yourself," he'd said, and signed his name with a flourish. Just like that, their marriage was over. Annalise had left San Francisco 3 days after the divorce was finalized. She'd packed everything she owned into her old Honda Civic, clothes, books, a few pieces of jewelry from before her marriage. Nothing that Henry had given her. She'd wanted no reminders of the life that had nearly consumed her. Her parents had begged her to come home to Oregon, but she couldn't face their small town, their concern, their inevitable questions. Instead, she'd driven north to Seattle, a city large enough to disappear in, far enough from San Francisco to feel safe. She'd been 6 weeks pregnant with what she'd still thought was one baby. The morning she'd left, she'd driven past the Cole Technologies headquarters one last time. Henry's silver Tesla had been parked in his reserved spot. Victoria's car had been next to it. Annalise had placed both hands on her stomach, where her secret was growing. "I promise you," she'd whispered, "you'll never know what it's like to be used, to be valued for what you can provide instead of who you are. I'll love you enough for 2 parents. I'll give you a real life, not a calculated one." The drive to Seattle had taken her 13 hours, stopping frequently for bathroom breaks and saltine crackers to settle her stomach. She'd cried for the first 2 hours, grieved for the last time over the marriage she'd thought she had. Then she dried her tears and focused on the future. Seattle had welcomed her with grey skies and rain, which had felt appropriate. She'd found a small studio apartment in the university district, cheap and clean enough. She'd registered with temp agencies under her maiden name and started taking bookkeeping jobs. When she'd gone for her first prenatal appointment at 8 weeks, the ultrasound technician had gotten very quiet. "Is something wrong?" Annalise had asked, panic rising. "Wrong? No, but there are 2 heartbeats. You're having twins. 2 babies who would have Henry's DNA, his features, maybe his intelligence. 2 children she'd have to raise alone on a bookkeeper's salary." She should have been terrified. Instead, lying on that examination table listening to the rapid flutter of 2 tiny hearts, she'd felt a fierce joy she'd never experienced before. "Twins," she'd repeated, starting to laugh through her tears. Okay, we can do this." The pregnancy had been difficult, constant nausea, exhaustion, her body struggling to support 2 growing babies on her limited resources. She'd worked until she was 7 months along, saved every penny she could. Serenity and Malik had been born on a snowy January morning, 5 weeks early and tiny but healthy. She'd held them both, one in each arm, and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost painful. These were hers, only hers. No one would ever make them feel inadequate or use them for strategic advantage. She'd work 3 jobs if she had to, go without sleep, without proper food, without anything, but they would know they were loved unconditionally. For 5 years, Annalise had kept that promise. She'd worked hard, first as a bookkeeper for small businesses, then building a small client base of her own. The money was never enough. They lived paycheck to paycheck, qualified for assistance programs she'd once been too proud to accept. But the twins had everything they needed. They were happy, secure, and loved. She'd dated exactly twice in those 5 years. Both times, the men had run when they'd learned she had twins. She'd told herself it was fine, that she didn't need a relationship, that her children were enough. There had been moments of weakness when she'd been tempted to look Henry up online, to see what he was doing, whether he'd married Victoria. But she'd never allowed herself to go down that path. That part of her life was dead and buried. Until yesterday, when that cream-colored envelope had arrived, and Henry's words had reached across 7 years of carefully constructed distance. Now, standing in her kitchen with his message on her phone, "We should discuss the twins' future, their real future." Annalise understood what she'd always known deep down, but had refused to acknowledge. Running from Henry Cole had only ever been temporary. Men like him didn't accept loss. They didn't forget. They waited for the right moment to reclaim what they believed was theirs. And somehow, he decided that moment was now. The question that kept Annalise awake that night, after she'd tucked Serenity and Malik into their beds and kissed their foreheads, was simple but terrifying. What could possibly make Henry want to claim children he'd never wanted in the first place? What was his real agenda, and how far would she have to go to protect them from it? The invitation sat on her kitchen counter, an elegant threat wrapped in expensive paper. She had 48 hours to decide. But really, Henry had already made the decision for her. She would go to that party, walk back into his world one more time. Not because he'd commanded it, but because mothers did whatever necessary to protect their children. Even if it meant facing the man who'd taught her that her heart was just another thing to be bought, used and discarded. Even if it meant risking everything she'd built. She picked up her phone and typed a single word in response to Henry's message. His reply came within seconds. "I look forward to seeing you again, Annalise. We have so much to discuss. Come alone." She stared at those last 2 words, understanding the threat within them. Don't bring the children. Don't let them anywhere near this meeting. which meant whatever Henry was planning, it was about them, but not for them. Annalise set her phone down and walked to the twins' bedroom, watching them sleep in the soft glow of their nightlight. Serenity clutched her stuffed rabbit. Malik had kicked his blankets off again. She adjusted Malik's covers, smoothed Serenity's hair, and made a silent vow. Whatever game Henry was playing, whatever power move he thought he was making, he would learn something he should have known 7 years ago. He'd never understood who she really was. He'd seen a naive young woman he could mold and control. He'd never seen the mother she would become. And he was about to discover that mothers were the most dangerous opponents of all. The first year after Serenity and Malik were born had been the hardest of Annalise's life. She'd returned to her studio apartment from the hospital with 2 tiny humans who depended entirely on her for survival, and the weight of that responsibility had been crushing. The babies had been premature, small and fragile, requiring feeding every 2 hours around the clock. Annalise had moved through those early months in a fog of exhaustion, barely able to distinguish day from night. Her savings had evaporated within weeks. Formula for 2 babies, diapers, the basics of infant care. It all cost far more than she'd anticipated. The studio apartment that had seemed adequate for 1 person was impossibly cramped with 2 cribs, baby supplies, and the constant noise of crying infants. She'd tried to return to temp work when the twins were 6 weeks old, but childcare costs had eaten up almost everything she earned. The daycares that accepted infants charged premium rates, especially for 2. She'd done the math over and over, hoping it would somehow work out differently, but the numbers never changed. One particularly brutal night when the twins were 3 months old, both babies screaming with colic, Annalise had sat on the floor of her tiny bathroom and sobbed. Her body ached from lack of sleep. Her brain felt like cotton. She had $17 in her checking account and another week until her next temp assignment paycheck. She'd pulled out her phone, Henry's contact information still saved from years ago, her thumb hovering over the call button. He was a billionaire. This money would mean nothing to him. 1 phone call and her children could have everything they needed: good food, proper clothes, a decent place to live, quality health care. All it would cost was her independence and her children's freedom from the Cole family's manipulation. She deleted his contact instead and gotten up to comfort her babies. That night, she'd made a decision. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to build something real. Not for herself, but for Serenity and Malik. They deserved a mother who was strong, capable, and successful on her own terms. By the time the twins turned 1, Annalise had developed a system that barely held together but somehow worked. She'd found an affordable daycare run by Mrs. Peterson, a grandmother who watched children in her home for reasonable rates. Mrs. Peterson had taken pity on Annalise's situation and given her a discount in exchange for help with bookkeeping for her small business. Annalise had picked up 3 regular bookkeeping clients, working during the twins' nap times and after they went to bed. She'd also taken a part-time position at a tutoring center, helping high school students with math and English. The pay was modest, but the work had sparked something in her. She'd always loved learning and had been good at explaining complex concepts in ways that made sense. Watching struggling students light up when they finally understood a difficult equation or essay structure had reminded her why she'd enjoyed event planning, the satisfaction of helping people achieve their goals. One of her tutoring students, a girl named Jessica who'd been failing algebra, had improved her grade from an F to a B over 3 months of work with Annalise. "You're the first teacher who ever made me feel like I wasn't stupid," Jessica had said during their last session. "You should do this full-time, like start your own company or something." The comment had planted a seed. Annalise had started researching what it would take to open an educational center. She discovered that a master's degree in education would give her credibility and open doors for grants and funding opportunities. So at 27 years old, with 2 toddlers at home and barely any money, She'd applied to Seattle University's part-time master's program in education. The acceptance letter had arrived on a Tuesday. She'd cried while reading it, Serenity and Malik playing with blocks at her feet, oblivious to the fact that their mother had just taken the first step toward changing their lives. The next 2 years had been brutal. Annalise had attended classes 2 evenings a week and on Saturday mornings, leaving the twins with Mrs. Peterson, or occasionally with a trusted babysitter she could barely afford. She'd studied during lunch breaks, written papers after midnight, survived on coffee and determination. Her classmates had been mostly younger students, fresh out of undergraduate programs, with no children and no real-world responsibilities beyond their coursework. They'd complained about the workload, about difficult professors, about not having enough time to socialize. Annalise had kept her head down and her focus sharp. She didn't have the luxury of complaining. There had been moments she'd wanted to quit, like the time Malik had come down with pneumonia during finals week, and she'd spent 3 days in the hospital with him, trying to study between doctor visits and breathing treatments. Or when Serenity had taken her first steps while Annalise was in class, and Mrs. Peterson had witnessed it instead of her. But she'd pushed through, driven by the vision of what success could mean for her children. She'd graduated summa cum laude, her thesis focusing on accessible education for underserved communities. Serenity and Malik, now 3 years old, had attended the ceremony in tiny formal outfits, clapping when their mama walked across the stage, even though they didn't understand what was happening. That master's degree had cost her sleep, health, and countless hours away from her babies. It had also given her the tools to build something that would change their lives forever. Annalise had started Second Chances Learning Center in her living room with 1 student and a dream. The name had come from her own story. She'd been given a second chance at life when she'd walked away from Henry, and she wanted to provide that same opportunity for students who struggled in traditional educational settings. Her first client had been the teenage son of one of her bookkeeping clients, a boy named David, who'd been labeled as having a learning disability and written off by his school. Annalise had recognized immediately that David didn't have a disability. He had dyslexia that had never been properly diagnosed or accommodated. She'd worked with him twice a week for 3 months, using specialized techniques she'd learned in her graduate program. His reading level had improved by 2 grades. His confidence had transformed completely. David's mother had told everyone she knew about the miracle worker who'd helped her son. Within a month, Annalise had 5 students. Within 3 months, she had 12. She'd converted her living room into a learning space, pushed the twins' toys into corners, and created an environment where struggling students could get individualized attention. She'd specialized in working with kids who had learning differences, who'd been told they weren't smart enough, who'd given up on themselves. Those were her kids, the ones the system had failed. She understood them because she'd been failed too, in different ways. The business had grown organically through word of mouth. Parents desperate for help with children who were falling behind in school had found their way to her door. She'd worked evenings and weekends, fitting sessions around the twins' schedules, barely sleeping but feeling more alive than she had since leaving San Francisco. After the first year, she'd had enough savings to rent a small office space, just 2 rooms in a modest building, but it was hers. She'd hired her first employee, a recent college graduate named Beth, who shared her passion for helping struggling learners. The twins had been 4 then, old enough to understand that Mama had a special place where she helped kids learn. They'd been so proud, telling everyone at their preschool about their Mama's school. By the time Serenity and Malik started kindergarten, Second Chances Learning Center had expanded to a larger location with 6 tutors on staff. Annalise had developed specialized programs for students with dyslexia, ADHD, and other learning differences. She'd partnered with local schools to provide services for students who couldn't afford private tutoring. The local newspaper had done a feature on her, Single Mother Builds Educational Empire from Nothing. The article had brought even more clients, more recognition, more opportunities. Now, at 32, Annalise employed 12 people and served over 100 students. The center had become profitable enough that she'd been able to move the twins into a proper 2-bedroom apartment, start a modest college fund, and actually breathe without constantly worrying about money. She'd built it all without Henry's money, without the Cole name, without anything except her own determination and the love she had for her children. Watching Serenity and Malik grow into their own people had been Annalise's greatest joy. Serenity had emerged as a natural leader from the time she could walk. She'd organized the other kids at daycare into elaborate games, mediated disputes with the wisdom of someone 3 times her age, and possessed an innate confidence that drew people to her. She had Henry's charisma, but used it with kindness rather than manipulation. At 5 years old, Serenity was the child who noticed when other kids were sad and made it her mission to cheer them up. She was fiercely protective of Malik, even though they'd been born only 4 minutes apart. She'd inherited Annalise's auburn hair and warm smile, but had Henry's commanding presence. "Mama, why is that lady crying?" Serenity had asked one day at the grocery store, pointing to a woman on her phone who looked distressed. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people have hard days." Serenity had walked over to the woman and offered her the stuffed bunny she'd been carrying. "You can hold Mr. Floppy. He makes me feel better when I'm sad." The woman had burst into tears again, but this time with a smile, and hugged Serenity while thanking her. That was Serenity, unable to see suffering without trying to fix it. Malik was different, quieter, more introspective, with an intensity that sometimes worried Annalise because it reminded her so much of Henry. He taught himself to read at 4 by studying the books Annalise read to them, piecing together patterns and sounds until he could decode words on his own. He had Henry's analytical mind, that same ability to see systems and connections that others missed. But unlike his father, Malik used his intelligence with empathy. He'd build elaborate structures with blocks, then immediately invite other kids to play with them. He'd solve puzzles meant for children twice his age, then patiently teach the solutions to his sister. "How does the moon stay up in the sky?" he'd asked one night before bed. Annalise had given him a simple explanation about gravity and orbits. But why doesn't gravity pull it down like it pulls down a ball? She'd ended up spending an hour discussing physics with her 5-year-old, watching his dark eyes, Henry's eyes, light up with understanding. Both children had pieces of Henry in them, but they'd been shaped by love and security rather than calculation and ambition. They were proof that DNA wasn't destiny, that children could inherit their father's gifts without his flaws. The growth of Second Chance's Learning Center had exceeded Annalise's wildest dreams. What had started as a desperate attempt to create flexible income while raising her twins had become a thriving business with a real impact on the community. Her 12 employees were carefully chosen, people who genuinely cared about students, who understood that learning differences didn't mean less capable, just differently capable. The center now occupied a renovated house near the university district, with 8 tutoring rooms, a small computer lab, and a comfortable waiting area where parents could grab coffee while their children worked with tutors. Annalise had decorated it herself, choosing warm colors and comfortable furniture, making it feel welcoming rather than institutional. She'd developed proprietary assessment tools to identify each student's learning style and challenges. Her success rates were remarkable. 85% of her students improved by at least 1 grade level within 6 months. Several had gone from failing to honor roll. The business had received grant funding to provide free services to low-income families. Annalise had created a sliding scale fee structure so that no child would be turned away because of their parents' financial situation. She remembered too well what it felt like to struggle, to need help and not be able to afford it. Local schools now referred students to second chances. The center had become the go-to resource for families dealing with learning challenges. Annalise had done it all while being fully present for her children. She'd never missed a school event, a parent-teacher conference, or an important milestone. She'd figured out how to build a business around motherhood rather than in spite of it. Her employees respected her work ethic and her values. Several had told her she was the best boss they'd ever had, that working at second chances felt less like a job and more like being part of a mission. Before we continue with what happens next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from nothing? Have you ever felt like you were starting over with everything stacked against you? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if you're finding value in Annalise's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich for more stories about resilience, wealth, and the complicated dynamics of power. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let's get back to the moment that threatened to destroy everything Annalise had built. The question Annalise had been dreading came on a Sunday afternoon, 2 days before she was supposed to attend Henry's party. She'd been helping the twins with an art project at the kitchen table, watching them create elaborate drawings with markers and construction paper. Serenity was drawing their family, 3 stick figures with big smiles, holding hands under a rainbow. Malik had been quiet for a while, focused on his own drawing. When Annalise looked over, she saw he'd drawn 4 stick figures instead of 3. "Who's that, baby?" she asked, pointing to the 4th figure. "That's our dad," Malik said matter-of-factly. "Everyone at school has a dad. Where's ours?" Annalise's heart stopped. They'd asked before, of course, but never with this directness, this insistence on a real answer. Serenity looked up from her drawing, suddenly interested. "Yeah, Mama. Jessie says her dad takes her to the park every Saturday. Why doesn't our dad do that?" Annalise set down the marker she'd been holding, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your dad lives far away. He and I decided it was better if we weren't together anymore, but that doesn't have anything to do with how much you're loved." "But does he know about us?" Malik pressed. Those dark eyes, Henry's eyes, studied her with an uncomfortable perception. "Does he know we exist?" The question was too sophisticated for a 5-year-old, but Malik had always been advanced beyond his years. "It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what you always say," Serenity chimed in. "But we're big now. We can understand complicated things." Annalise looked at her children. These beautiful, brilliant, kind-hearted children who deserved the truth but were too young to handle the full weight of it. "Your father is a very busy man," she began carefully. "He has important work that takes up all his time. I decided to raise you by myself because I wanted to make sure you had the kind of childhood I thought was best. One where you were loved and happy and free to be yourselves." "Is he nice?" Serenity asked. "Our dad?" Annalise thought about Henry, charming and cold, brilliant and cruel, capable of kindness when it served his purposes, but ultimately loyal only to himself and his ambitions. "He's complicated," she said finally, "just like everyone else." "Can we meet him?" Malik asked. "Maybe he'd want to know us if he met us. Maybe he'd like us." The pain in Annalise's chest was physical. Her children were already blaming themselves, already assuming their father's absence was somehow their fault, that they weren't good enough to be wanted. "Listen to me, both of you." She pulled them close, one on each side. "You are the most amazing, wonderful, perfect children in the entire world. If your father doesn't know you, that's his loss, not yours. Do you understand? There is nothing wrong with you, nothing you need to change or fix. You are already enough, exactly as you are." Serenity snuggled into her side. "But it would be nice to have a dad like other kids." "I know, baby. I know." Malik was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question that broke her heart. Did he leave because of us? Because he didn't want kids? "He left before you were born," Annalise said truthfully. "He never even knew you existed. And that was my choice, because I wanted to protect you from what? From a family that would see you as pawns in their power games. From a father who would value you for what you could do for him, rather than who you are. From a world where love is transactional and everyone has a price. From being hurt," she said simply. The twins seemed to accept this, returning to their drawings. But Annalise noticed that Malik left the fourth stick figure in his picture, carefully colouring it in with a brown marker. That night, after she'd tucked them into bed, she sat in her living room and stared at Henry's invitation. In 3 days, she would see him again, walk back into his world, face the man who'd shattered her ability to trust. And somehow, she'd have to make sure he never found out about the 2 perfect children sleeping in the next room, the ones who were starting to ask questions she couldn't answer, the ones who were beginning to wonder why they weren't enough to be wanted by their father. Annalise picked up her phone and looked at the last message from Henry. Come alone. She would go alone. She would face whatever he wanted, deal with whatever threat he was making. But if he somehow knew about Serenity and Malik, if this was about claiming them or using them for some purpose she couldn't yet see. She looked at the drawing Malik had left on the kitchen table, at the 4th stick figure he'd added to their family portrait, and felt a cold determination settle over her. Henry Cole had taught her 7 years ago that love wasn't real, that everything was a transaction. He was about to learn what happened when you threatened the only real love she'd ever known, and it wouldn't end well for him. That night, after the twins' questions about their father, Annalise broke the rule she'd maintained for 7 years. She opened her laptop and searched for Henry Cole. The screen flooded with results business articles, press releases, society page photos. She clicked on the first news article, dated 3 months ago. Cole Technologies posts record profits under CEO's leadership. There was a photograph of Henry at a shareholder meeting, standing at a podium in an immaculate suit. He looked older, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there when they were married. His hair had a few strands of silver at the temples now, but he still had that commanding presence, that absolute certainty that he controlled everything around him. Annalise scrolled through more articles. Henry had expanded Cole Technologies aggressively over the past 7 years, acquiring smaller companies, pushing into new markets. The business was thriving. He'd been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and Bloomberg. Wall Street analysts praised his strategic vision. But it was the society coverage that caught her attention. There were dozens of photos from charity galas, fundraisers, opera openings, all the events that had been her life during their brief marriage. In every single photograph, Henry attended alone. No date, no companion, just him in his perfectly tailored suits, smiling his polished corporate smile that never reached his eyes. She found an article from 2 years ago in San Francisco magazine titled "The City's Most Eligible Bachelor." The piece profiled Henry's success, his wealth, his influence. Near the end there was a paragraph that made her pause. When asked about his personal life, Cole becomes notably reticent. "I was married once," he says, his expression unreadable. "It didn't work out." He declines to elaborate, citing a non-disclosure agreement. Friends say the notoriously private CEO has shown little interest in dating since his divorce 7 years ago, focusing instead on building his business empire. "Henry's married to his work," says longtime colleague Victoria Laurent. "Nothing else seems to interest him." Victoria Laurent, still in his life, still speaking for him to the press. Annalise wondered if they'd continued their affair, or if that too had been just another transaction that had run its course. She searched for more personal information, digging deeper into recent coverage. Most of it was business-focused, but she found a few candid shots from various events. In all of them, Henry stood slightly apart from the crowd, his posture perfect but his face distant, disconnected. One photograph in particular struck her. It was from a children's hospital fundraiser 6 months ago. Henry was shaking hands with a young patient, a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5, the same age as Malik and Serenity. The boy was grinning up at Henry with pure joy. Henry's expression was polite but uncomfortable, as if he didn't quite know what to do with a child's uncomplicated happiness. Annalise stared at that photo for a long time, trying to reconcile this man with the one who'd written, "We should discuss the twins' future, their real future." Did he really know about Serenity and Malik, or was she reading threats into ambiguous words because she was terrified of losing her children? She continued her search, looking for any mention of children, family plans, anything that might explain his sudden interest in contacting her. But there was nothing. Henry's life appeared to be exactly what it had been during their marriage. All business, all strategy, no genuine human connection. Then she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a brief mention in a business journal article about succession planning in family-owned companies. The article discussed how Cole Technologies, despite being a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, had no clear succession plan. Henry's father had retired 5 years ago. His mother Eleanor still sat on the board, but was getting older. Henry had no siblings, no children, no designated heir. Industry analysts expressed concern about the lack of succession planning at Cole Technologies, the article read. CEO Henry Cole, 37, remains unmarried and childless. Should anything happen to him, the company's future leadership remains unclear. Some board members have reportedly urged Cole to consider the company's long-term stability, but sources say he's been resistant to discussing the issue. The article was dated 4 months ago. Annalise's hands went numb. Succession, heirs, the future of the Cole empire. He'd found out about the twins somehow, and now he needed them. Not because he wanted to be a father, not because he cared about Serenity and Malik as people, but because they were Cole blood. They could be molded into the heirs his company needed. She slammed the laptop shut, her breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't about her at all. It had never been about her. She was just the inconvenient woman who happened to have custody of the children he now needed for his strategic plans. The next morning, Annalise made a decision that went against every protective instinct she had. If Henry already knew about the twins, and she was increasingly certain he did, then hiding them would only make things worse. She needed to be strategic, to think several moves ahead the way he always did. But she also needed to maintain some normalcy for Serenity and Malik, who were still innocent and unaware that their entire world might be about to shift. "We're going shopping today," she announced over breakfast. "Somewhere special." "For what?" Serenity asked, syrup from her pancakes dripping down her chin. "For fancy clothes. We're going to visit some old friends of Mama's in San Francisco this weekend, and we need to look our best." Malik looked up from his orange juice, those analytical eyes studying her face. "You look worried, Mama." "Just want to make sure everything goes perfectly," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "These are important people." They drove to a department store Annalise normally avoided because of the prices. But if they were going to attend Henry's gala, and she'd decided they would, on her terms, then they needed to look like they belonged there. A saleswoman approached as they entered the children's formal wear section. She took in Annalise's off-brand jeans and clearance rack sweater, and her smile became professional but cool. "Can I help you find something?" "I need formal outfits for both children," Annalise said, straightening her spine. "Something appropriate for an upscale evening event." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Our formal collection starts at $200 per piece." "That's fine." Serenity was already exploring the racks, pulling out dresses and holding them up to herself. Malik stood close to Annalise, uncomfortable in the fancy store. "What about this one, Mama?" Serenity held up a powder blue dress with layers of tulle. "Try it on, sweetheart." For the next hour, Annalise let her children play dress-up, watching them transform into miniature versions of the society children she'd once encountered at Cole events. Serenity found a deep emerald dress that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Malik, after much coaxing, agreed to try on a small suit, charcoal grey with a crisp white shirt. When they emerged from the dressing rooms, Annalise's breath caught. They looked like coals. Serenity stood tall in her dress, already carrying herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in formal settings. Malik adjusted his tie with careful precision, his serious little face reminding her so strongly of Henry that her chest ached. "We look fancy." Serenity twirled, making the dress flare out. "You both look beautiful," Annalise said, her voice thick. "Perfect." She bought the outfits along with proper shoes and accessories, watching the total climb higher than her monthly grocery budget. But this was an investment in armor. If they were going to walk into Henry's world, they needed to look like they had every right to be there. For herself, Annalise chose a simple but elegant navy dress from a consignment shop they visited next. Nothing too expensive, nothing that screamed desperation or trying too hard, just an understated class. "Why are we getting so dressed up?" Malik asked as they loaded shopping bags into the car. "You said we were just visiting friends." Annalise knelt down to his level. "These are friends I used to know a long time ago, before you were born. They're used to fancy parties and nice clothes. I want them to see how amazing you both are." "Will our dad be there?" Serenity asked suddenly. The question hit Annalise like a physical blow. "Why would you ask that? You said he lives far away. San Francisco is far away. And you look the way you do when something important is happening. 5 years old and already too perceptive." "I don't know who will be there," Annalise said, which was technically true even if it was a lie by omission. "But no matter what happens, remember that you are wonderful exactly as you are. You don't need to impress anyone or be anyone except yourselves, okay?" Both children nodded, though Malik still looked uncertain. That evening, Annalise set the kitchen table with their nicest dishes, mismatched plates from thrift stores, but clean and presentable. "Tonight we're going to practice fancy dinner manners," she announced. "Why?" Serenity asked. "Because at the party this weekend, there will be a lot of people watching how we act. I want you to feel comfortable and confident." She taught them which fork to use for salad versus the main course, how to place their napkins in their laps, how to eat soup without slurping. The twins thought it was a game, giggling when Malik accidentally knocked over his water glass while reaching for the bread. But underneath the light-hearted lesson, Annalise's anxiety was eating her alive. She was teaching her children to navigate Henry's world, preparing them to meet people who would judge them based on their manners, their clothes, their pedigree. Everything she'd tried to protect them from was rushing toward them, and she was helping it happen. "When you meet new people at the party," she continued, "remember to make eye contact and shake hands firmly. Like this." She demonstrated, and they practiced with each other. "What if someone asks about our dad?" Malik asked quietly, Annalise's hands still. "What would you want to say?" "I don't know." "That's why I'm asking," she thought carefully before answering. "You can say that your father lives in San Francisco and you're hoping to meet him someday. That's true, isn't it?" Malik nodded slowly. "Are we going to meet him this weekend?" "I honestly don't know, baby. Maybe. Would you want to?" Both children considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think so," Serenity said finally. "I want to know if he's nice, and if he might want to be our dad for real." The hope in her voice was devastating. "Remember what I told you," Annalise said gently. "You are already complete and perfect. Whether your father is in your life or not doesn't change your value. You understand?" They nodded, but she could see the longing in their eyes. They wanted what other children had. 2 parents, a complete family. The fairy tale she'd once believed in and learned was a lie. The next morning, Annalise called Rebecca Morrison, the attorney who'd handled her divorce. "I need to talk to you about custody protection," Annalise said without preamble. "Hypothetically, if my ex-husband wanted to claim parental rights to children he didn't know existed when we divorced, what would be his legal standing?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you telling me Henry Cole has children he doesn't know about? Hypothetically, Annalise." Rebecca's voice was serious now. "If he found out and wanted custody or visitation, he'd have a strong case. He's the biological father. The fact that you didn't tell him about the children could actually work against you. Courts don't look kindly on parents who hide children from the other parent, even if there were good reasons." Annalise's stomach dropped. "Even if he explicitly said he never wanted children during our marriage. Do you have that in writing?" "No, just conversations." "Then it's your word against his. And his word comes with a lot more money and power behind it." Annalise gripped the phone tighter. "So what are my options?" "Honestly, if he pursues this, your best bet is to negotiate. He'll have lawyers who can tie you up in court for years, drain your resources, and ultimately he'll probably get at least partial custody. The man is a billionaire with no criminal record. Unless you can prove he's unfit, which sounds like you can't, a judge will say those children deserve to know their father, even if their father only wants them as heirs to his company. You'd have to prove that's his motivation, which would be nearly impossible. Look, my advice? If he reaches out about the children, don't be defensive. Be willing to discuss reasonable arrangements. Show the court you're putting the children's interests first, not your own feelings about your ex-husband." After the call, Annalise sat in her car outside the twin school, watching other parents pick up their children. Normal families with normal problems. None of them were facing the possibility of losing their children to a billionaire with unlimited resources and strategic motivations. She pulled out her phone and composed a message to Henry. "I'll attend your party on Saturday, but we need to establish ground rules. Whatever you think you know, whatever you want. We discuss it privately first. No surprises, no games. If you want a conversation, let's have it like adults." His response came within minutes. "Agreed. Come to the estate at 6 p.m., 1 hour before the other guests arrive. We'll talk privately in my study." "And Annalise? I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. It will be better for everyone involved." The presumption in that message, that he knew what was better for everyone, that she was being reasonable by complying with his demands, made her want to throw her phone across the parking lot. But she took a deep breath and typed back, "See you Saturday." As Saturday approached, the contrast between Annalise's dread and her children's excitement became almost unbearable. Serenity talked constantly about the party, about the fancy dress she'd wear, about meeting Mama's old friends. She'd created elaborate scenarios in her mind about what it would be like, who they'd meet, what the food would taste like. "Do you think there will be a chocolate fountain?" she asked Thursday night while Annalise braided her hair. Jessie went to a party with a chocolate fountain and she said it was the most amazing thing ever. "Maybe," Annalise said, her hands working automatically through her daughter's soft curls. "Rich people do like their chocolate fountains." Malik was quieter but equally anticipatory. He'd asked Annalise to teach him about San Francisco, so they'd spent an evening looking at pictures online. The Golden Gate Bridge, the cable cars, the Victorian houses climbing the hills. "It looks beautiful," he'd said, studying a photograph of the bay at sunset. "Can we visit the ocean while we're there?" "Maybe. We'll see how much time we have." What she didn't tell them was that they might be visiting San Francisco a lot more in the future if Henry got his way. That this city she'd fled might become part of their regular lives, whether she wanted it or not. Friday night, Annalise couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. What would she say to Henry? How would she protect her children while also appearing reasonable to any court that might eventually get involved? How could she negotiate with a man who'd always held all the power in their relationship? At 2 a.m., she got up and went to check on the twins. They were both sleeping peacefully, Serenity curled around her stuffed rabbit, Malik sprawled across his bed with one arm flung out. She stood in their doorway for a long time, memorizing this moment, because after tomorrow, everything might change. The simple life they'd built, the security and happiness they'd found, all of it hung in the balance. "I won't let him hurt you," she whispered into the darkness. "Whatever happens, I won't let him turn you into chess pieces in his games." But even as she made the promise, she knew she might not be able to keep it. Henry Cole was one of the most powerful men in California. She was a single mother running a small tutoring business. The odds had never been in her favor. Saturday morning, Annalise's phone rang at 7 a.m. It was her younger brother, Daniel, 3 years younger than Annalise, a high school teacher in Portland. "I had a bad feeling," he said without preamble. "What's going on, Annie?" Daniel Vance had always been close with Annalise, and he'd been furious when he'd found out what Henry had done during their marriage. He'd wanted to drive to San Francisco and confront him, but Annalise had made him promise to stay away. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're a terrible liar. You've been weird on the phone all week. What aren't you telling me?" Annalise closed her bedroom door so the twins wouldn't overhear. "Henry contacted me, invited me to a party at his estate. I think he knows about Serenity and Malik." The silence on the other end was thunderous. Then, "I'm coming with you." "Daniel, no." "I'm not asking, Annie. You're not walking into that viper's nest alone. I can be there by noon. We'll face him together." Tears pricked her eyes. "You have school. It's Saturday, genius. And even if it wasn't, you're my sister. You think I'm going to let you deal with that bastard by yourself? Not happening. I'm bringing the twins. He specifically said to come alone, but I'm not hiding them anymore. If he knows, then we deal with it head on. Even better. He'll be less likely to pull anything with witnesses around. I'll be there by noon. Text me your address." After they hung up, Annalise felt marginally better. Having her brother there wouldn't change the fundamental power imbalance, but at least she wouldn't be completely alone. Daniel arrived at 11:30, wrapping her in a bear hug the moment she opened the door. "You look exhausted," he said, studying her face. "Have you slept at all?" "Not much." He was introduced to his niece and nephew, who'd heard stories about their Uncle Daniel but had only seen him a handful of times because of the distance. They took to him immediately, Serenity climbing into his lap to show him her new dress, Malik asking him about teaching and whether he liked his job. "Your mama named you after our grandfather," Daniel told Malik. "He was the smartest, kindest man I ever knew, just like you're going to be." The twins giggled, and for a moment the apartment felt normal again. But then it was time to pack the car, time to start the drive to San Francisco, time to face whatever Henry had planned. They left Seattle at 1 p.m., giving themselves plenty of time for the 10-hour drive. Daniel drove while Annalise sat in the passenger seat, watching the miles disappear. The twins entertained themselves in the back with tablets and books, occasionally asking, "Are we there yet?" Somewhere around Eugene, Serenity fell asleep. Malik stayed awake, staring out the window with unusual intensity. "You okay, buddy?" his uncle asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About we meet our dad tonight. About what I'll say to him." Annalise turned in her seat. "Baby, I told you, I don't know if—" "You're not a good liar, Mama," he said gently. "I know that's why we're really going. To meet him. It's okay. I'm not scared. But Annalise was scared enough for both of them. They stopped for dinner in Sacramento, stretching their legs and eating fast food that the twins thought was a special treat. Then back in the car for the final 2 hours. As they crossed the Bay Bridge into San Francisco, the city lights spread out before them like a jeweled web. The twins pressed their faces to the windows, awed by the skyline. "It's so pretty," Serenity breathed. Annalise's stomach churned. The city that had once felt full of possibility now seemed full of threats. They checked into a modest hotel near the airport at 9 p.m. The twins were wired despite the long drive, too excited about the next day to settle down. Annalise and her brother finally got them to sleep around 10:30. "You should sleep too," Daniel said, watching her pace the hotel room. "You need to be sharp tomorrow." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see 100 different ways this goes wrong." "Then let's think strategically. What's your best-case scenario?" Annalise sat down on the edge of the bed. "Best case? Henry wants to meet the twins, maybe set up some kind of reasonable visitation schedule. We negotiate terms that put the kids first. Everyone behaves like adults. And worst case? He tries to take them from me. Uses his money and lawyers to claim I'm an unfit mother for hiding them. Turns them into props for his company's succession planning. Teaches them that people are assets and love is just another transaction." Daniel squeezed her shoulder. "We won't let that happen. How do we stop a billionaire who's used to getting everything he wants? By remembering that you're their mother. You've raised them for 5 years with nothing but love and determination. No court is going to ignore that. No amount of money can erase the fact that you're the one who's been there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every important moment." Annalise wanted to believe him. But she'd learned the hard way that money could buy a lot of things, including justice. She finally fell into an uneasy sleep around midnight, her dreams full of courtrooms and judges and Henry's cold eyes studying Serenity and Malik like they were balance sheets. When her alarm went off at 8 a.m., her first thought was, "Today everything changes." Her second thought was, "Please let me be strong enough to protect them." The twins woke up in high spirits, chattering about the party, while Annalise helped them into their fancy outfits. Serenity's emerald dress fit perfectly. Malik's little suit made him look older, more serious. Annalise put on her navy dress and minimal makeup, studying herself in the mirror. She looked tired but determined. Not the naive young woman who'd married Henry, but not quite the warrior she needed to be either. Her brother Daniel knocked on the connecting door between their rooms. "Ready?" "No, but we're going anyway." They loaded into the car one more time. The drive to Pacific Heights took 20 minutes through morning traffic. With each mile, Annalise's anxiety grew. The Cole estate sat on top of one of San Francisco's most exclusive hills, surrounded by walls and gates that screamed privacy and wealth. Annalise pulled up to the intercom at exactly 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Henry had told her to arrive. She rolled down her window and pressed the button. A voice crackled through. "Name?" "Annalise Vance. Henry is expecting me." There was a pause, then the massive iron gates began to swing open. "Here we go," Daniel muttered from the passenger seat. As they drove up the long driveway, the estate came into view. A massive modern mansion of glass and steel, perched to take maximum advantage of the bay views. It was even more imposing than she remembered. Standing on the front steps, waiting, was Henry Cole. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Even from a distance, Annalise could feel the force of his presence, that commanding certainty that had first attracted her and ultimately destroyed her. She parked the car and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. "Mama?" Serenity's voice from the back seat. "Is that him? Is that our dad?" Annalise looked in the rearview mirror at her daughter's hopeful face, then at her son's cautious one. "Yes, baby. That's your father." She took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out to face the man who'd broken her heart 7 years ago. The man who might be about to break it all over again. Henry's eyes went immediately to the car's back seat, where 2 small faces peered out at him. And for the first time since Annalise had known him, Henry Cole looked completely, utterly shocked. The contrast between Annalise's 10-year-old Honda SUV and the gleaming luxury vehicles typically gracing the Cole estate's circular driveway couldn't have been more stark. As she pulled to a stop behind Henry's silver Tesla, she was acutely aware of the rust spot on her rear bumper, the faded paint, and the child's safety seats visible through the windows. This car told a story, not of wealth and privilege, but of a woman who'd chosen practicality over prestige, who'd prioritized car seats and reliable transportation over maintaining appearances. Henry stood motionless on the steps, his eyes locked on the back seat of her vehicle. His face had gone completely blank, not the polished corporate mask he usually wore, but genuine shock that had stripped away all his carefully constructed defenses. Annalise turned off the engine, her hands trembling slightly. This was it. The moment 7 years of careful separation came crashing down. "Stay in the car for just a minute," she told the twins softly. "Let me talk to him first." "But Mama," Serenity started. "Please, baby, just 1 minute." Her brother Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've got this." "I'll stay with the kids." Annalise stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady beneath her navy dress. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from the estate's immaculate gardens. Everything about this place screamed money, from the marble steps to the precisely manicured hedges to the way the glass and steel structure seemed to glow in the fading sunlight. She'd forgotten how intimidating wealth could be when it was displayed aggressively. Henry descended the steps slowly, his movements controlled, but his eyes never leaving the car where 2 small faces pressed against the window, watching him with undisguised curiosity. "Annalise." His voice was rougher than she remembered, lacking its usual smooth confidence. You brought them. You said we had things to discuss about my children's future," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I decided they should be here for that conversation. I told you to come alone, and I decided that hiding them would only make things worse. If you know about them, and clearly you do, then there's no point in pretending they don't exist." Henry had stopped about 10 feet away from her, maintaining distance as if afraid to come closer. His face was pale beneath his tan, his jaw clenched tight. For a man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, he looked absolutely shattered. "How long have you known?" Annalise asked quietly. 3 weeks. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I hired a private investigator to find you. I needed to." He trailed off, seeming lost for words, something she'd never witnessed before. "Needed to what?" "Talk to you. About us. About what happened." He finally tore his gaze from the car to look at her directly. "I didn't know about them. The investigator found you, found your business, found their school registration. I saw their birth dates and did the math." "So this isn't about your company's succession planning?" Henry's eyebrows drew together in genuine confusion. "What? No, this is about—" He glanced back at the car. "This is about the fact that I have children I never knew existed." Before Annalise could respond, the car door opened. Her brother Daniel had apparently decided the waiting period was over. Serenity emerged first, her emerald dress catching the light as she stepped onto the driveway. Her eyes went wide as she took in the massive house, the fountains, the perfectly sculpted gardens stretching as far as she could see. "Mama," she breathed, "this place is like a palace." Malik followed more cautiously, his small hand gripping his uncle's, but even his usual reserved demeanor couldn't hide his awe at the surroundings. His dark eyes, so like Henry's, swept across the estate with the analytical assessment that was pure Cole. "How many people live here?" he asked, his voice small but clear in the evening air. Annalise moved quickly to her children, placing herself between them and Henry. Just one person lives here now. This is Mr. Cole's home. Henry remained frozen on the steps, staring at the children as if they were ghosts. Annalise watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. Shock, confusion, something that might have been grief, something else that looked almost like longing. They looked like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Like you, Annalise completed quietly. Yes, they have your eyes, your expressions. Malik has your mind. Serenity has your presence. They're yours, Henry. There's no question about that. Serenity, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, had wandered a few steps toward the fountain, enchanted by the water dancing in elaborate patterns. Malik stayed close to his uncle, but his gaze had fixed on Henry with unsettling intensity. "Are you our father?" the boy asked directly, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. The question hung in the air like a blade. Henry opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The CEO who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals looked completely unprepared for a 5-year-old's simple question. Yes, he finally managed. I suppose I am, you suppose. Annalise's protective instincts flared. Either you are or you aren't, Henry. Don't give them uncertainty wrapped in corporate speak. He flinched at her tone. You're right. I'm sorry. He addressed Malik directly, seeming to gather himself. Yes, I'm your father. Though I only just learned about you and your sister. Why? Serenity had returned from the fountain, her natural boldness overriding any shyness. Didn't you want us? The innocence of the question, the lack of judgment, just pure curiosity, seemed to hit Henry harder than any accusation could have. I didn't know you existed, he said, his voice strained. Your mother and I. We weren't together when you were born. I had no idea she was pregnant. But if you had known, Malik pressed, would you have wanted us? Annalise wanted to intervene, to protect both Henry and her children from this painful conversation happening on his doorstep. But she also recognized that these questions needed to be asked, these answers needed to be heard. Henry looked at Annalise, something desperate in his eyes, as if asking for permission or guidance. She offered neither, just waited to hear what he would say. I don't know, he admitted finally, and Annalise had to give him credit for honesty instead of empty reassurances. When your mother and I were married, I didn't think I wanted children. I thought they would complicate my life, distract me from my work. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Do you want us now? Serenity asked, tilting her head to study him. I don't know you yet, Henry said carefully, but I'd like to, if that's something you'd want. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up behind Annalise's Honda, and a couple emerged, the Montgomerys, old friends of Eleanor's. Patricia Montgomery, the woman who'd once told Annalise she was essentially an employee rather than a real Cole, stopped short when she recognized Annalise standing in the driveway. Annalise Vance? Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness. My goodness, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd left San Francisco years ago. I did, Annalise replied evenly. I'm just visiting. Patricia's eyes swept over Annalise's modest dress, her practical shoes, then landed on the children. Her expression sharpened with predatory interest. And who are these darlings? Babysitting for someone? Before Annalise could answer, her brother Daniel stepped forward, placing a protective hand on each child's shoulder. These are her children, Serenity and Malik. Patricia's gaze snapped to Henry, who'd remained silent during the exchange. She was calculating. Annalise could see it, noting the timing, the children's ages, the resemblance to Henry that was impossible to miss up close. How lovely, Patricia said slowly. I wasn't aware you had children, Annalise. There's a lot you're not aware of, Patricia, Annalise replied with more edge than she'd intended. Another car arrived, then another. Henry's guests were beginning to show up for the gala, and they were getting a show they hadn't expected, the host standing on his front steps with his ex-wife and 2 children who looked remarkably like younger versions of himself. "Henry," Patricia said pointedly, "shall we go inside? I believe your mother mentioned cocktails at 7, but Henry didn't move, didn't even acknowledge Patricia's presence. His attention remained fixed on Serenity and Malik with an intensity that made Annalise nervous. "Everyone inside," Henry said suddenly, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "We'll continue this conversation in private." He led them through the massive front doors into an entry hall that made Serenity gasp audibly. The space was 3 stories high, with a floating staircase and a chandelier that probably cost more than Annalise's annual income. Everything was glass and marble and expensive modern art. The twins stayed close to their mother, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of wealth on display. Henry directed them past the main rooms, where caterers were setting up for the gala, and down a hallway to a private sitting room. It was smaller, more intimate, decorated in warm tones that felt almost welcoming compared to the stark modernity of the rest of the house. "Please, sit," Henry said, gesturing to a cream-colored sofa. Annalise sat with Serenity on one side and Malik on the other. Her brother Daniel remained standing, positioning himself slightly behind the sofa like a guardian. Henry paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The view was stunning. The Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance, the water glittering with reflected light from the city. But Annalise couldn't focus on the scenery. She was watching Henry, seeing him truly look at her for the first time since they'd arrived. His eyes travelled over her face, noting the changes 7 years had wrought. The lines around her eyes from sleepless nights with sick children, the faint scar on her chin from when she'd fallen while pregnant and caught herself before hitting the ground, the calluses on her hands from work, from building a business with nothing but determination. She wasn't the polished society wife he'd married. She was something harder, more real, forged by struggle and single motherhood. "You look different," he said quietly. "I am different. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore." "Maybe she was never really there," he replied, surprising her. "Maybe I was so busy trying to mold you into what I thought a coal wife should be that I never actually saw who you were." Annalise hadn't expected introspection from Henry. The man she'd divorced would never have admitted to being wrong about anything. "People change," she said carefully. "Or maybe they just become more of who they always were underneath." Henry moved closer, crouching down so he was at eye level with the children. Serenity watched him with open curiosity. Malik regarded him with cautious assessment. "Can I ask you some questions?" Henry addressed them both. They nodded, moving slightly closer to their mother. "What are your favorite things to do?" Serenity answered first, her natural enthusiasm overcoming her nervousness. "I like to dance and draw and help people. Mama says I'm good at making sad people feel better. What about you, Malik?" The boy considered the question seriously. "I like to read and build things and figure out how stuff works. And I like math. Mama says I'm advanced for my age." "I can tell," Henry said. "You speak very articulately for a 5-year-old. "He reads at a 3rd grade level," Annalise added quietly. "Serenity's reading is advanced too, though she's more interested in stories about people than Malik's science books." "Do you do well in school?" he asked. Both children nodded enthusiastically, and Serenity launched into a description of her kindergarten class, her teacher, her best friend Jessie. Malik added details about the science corner and the reading nook. Annalise watched Henry listen to their chatter, saw something in his face soften in a way she'd never witnessed during their marriage. He asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely interested in their answers. even smiled slightly when Serenity told him about the time she'd convinced her whole class to put on a play about butterflies. This wasn't the Henry she remembered, cold, distant, viewing everything through the lens of business strategy. This was someone she didn't recognize. It was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been the heartless corporate shark she'd expected. "Can I see your house?" Serenity asked suddenly, her natural curiosity overwhelming any sense of propriety. "It's so big. Do you have a slide inside?" "Jessie's cousin has a slide in her house, and it's the coolest thing ever." Henry's lips quivered in what might have been the beginning of a genuine smile. "No slide, I'm afraid. But there's a library that takes up an entire room. Would you like to see it?" "Yes," both children exclaimed simultaneously. Annalise started to object. They were here to have a difficult conversation, not take a house tour, but Henry was already standing, offering his hands to the twins. Serenity took his hand without hesitation, her small fingers disappearing into his larger ones. Malik hesitated, looking to his mother for permission. "It's okay," Annalise said softly, though her heart was hammering. "You can go look." Malik placed his hand in Henry's other hand, and the three of them walked toward the door. But Serenity paused, tugging on Henry's hand to get his attention. "What should we call you?" she asked. "Mr. Cole seems too fancy." Henry froze, his composure cracking visibly. He looked back at Annalise, that desperate expression returning. "You can call me Henry for now," he managed. "Until we figure out. Until we all decide what feels right." "Okay, Henry," Serenity said cheerfully, accepting this easily the way children do. "Come on, Malik, let's see the library." She pulled Henry forward, and he went with her, this powerful billionaire CEO being led around his own house by a 5-year-old girl in an emerald dress. Daniel sat down next to Annalise on the sofa. "Well," he said quietly, "that was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly. Corporate shark trying to negotiate custody like it was a merger deal, not whatever that was." Annalise watched through the doorway as Henry showed the twins the library, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling, bookshelves, and one of those sliding ladders. Serenity was already climbing the ladder, while Malik examined the books with reverent care. "He seems different," her brother continued. "From what you described, anyway. More human." "7 years is a long time," Annalise said. "People can change, or he's playing a long game, getting the kids to trust him before he makes his real move. Maybe. But did you see his face when Serenity asked what to call him? That wasn't a strategy. That was genuine emotion." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Henry interact with the children. He was pointing out books to Malik, answering Serenity's rapid-fire questions about how many books he had and whether he'd read them all, and why he didn't have any books about princesses. "What are you going to do?" her brother asked finally. "I have no idea," Annalise admitted. "I came here prepared for a fight, prepared to protect them from a man who wanted to use them. But if he genuinely wants to be a father, then what? Then I have to let him try, for their sake. They deserve the chance to know their father, even if he broke my heart." The door to the sitting room opened, and Eleanor Cole swept in with the commanding presence of someone who'd ruled San Francisco society for 40 years. She was impeccably dressed in a champagne-colored gown, her silver hair styled perfectly, diamonds glittering at her throat. She looked exactly as Annalise remembered, elegant, cold, and utterly in control. "Henry, the Mitchells have arrived and are asking for you," Eleanor began, then stopped short when she saw Annalise on the sofa. "You—" The single word was loaded with venom. "What are you doing here? I thought we'd seen the last of you when you finally accepted that you didn't belong in this family." Annalise stood slowly, drawing herself up to her full height. "Hello, Eleanor. You're looking well. Don't patronize me. Henry, why is your ex-wife in our home? Mother, there's something you need to know." But Eleanor's attention had shifted to the library visible through the open doors. She could see Henry standing with two small children, one of them holding a book almost as big as she was. Eleanor's face went absolutely white. She moved toward the library like someone in a trance, her usual grace faltering. Annalise and her brother followed, some instinct telling her she needed to be there for what was about to happen. Eleanor stood in the library doorway, staring at Serenity and Malik. The children had noticed her entrance and were watching her with curious interest. "Henry," Eleanor's voice shook, the first time Annalise had ever heard her sound uncertain. "Who are these children?" Henry straightened, placing a protective hand on each child's shoulder. The gesture was unconscious, Annalise noted, already defending them even as he was just beginning to know them. "Mother, this is Serenity and Malik. They're 5 years old. They were born in January, 7 years after Annalise and I married." Eleanor's sharp mind was already doing the calculations. Her eyes moved from the children to Annalise, back to the children, then to Henry. "You're telling me that she—" Eleanor couldn't even finish the sentence. "I'm telling you that when Annalise left, she was pregnant. She didn't tell me. She raised them alone in Seattle for 5 years. That's preposterous. You would have known. Your lawyers would have found out during the divorce proceedings." "I kept them hidden," Annalise said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "I had them under my maiden name in a different state. I made sure there was no paper trail connecting them to Henry or the Cole family." Eleanor's face was transforming from shock to fury. "You hid his children from him? You denied him his rights as a father? That's unconscionable. That's what I had to do to protect them," Annalise cut in, her own anger rising. "From you, from this family that treats people like assets, from a world where everything is a transaction and nothing is real. How dare you—" "No, how dare you?" Annalise stepped forward, 7 years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "You made my life hell during our marriage. You sabotaged me at every turn, made sure I knew I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of the Cole name. You practically threw Victoria at Henry, encouraging his affair. Did you really think I would hand over my babies to be raised in that toxic environment?" Eleanor's hand flew to her chest, diamonds glittering. "I never encouraged. You absolutely did. But that's not even the point anymore." Annalise looked at Henry, then back at Eleanor. "The point is that these children exist. They're happy, healthy, and loved. I've given them everything I have for 5 years, and now you know about them, so we have to figure out what happens next." Eleanor's gaze returned to the twins, who were watching this confrontation with wide eyes. Serenity had moved closer to Malik, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. "These children," Eleanor said slowly, "are Coles." "They're Vances," Annalise corrected. "That's the name on their birth certificates. That's the name they've always known. But their blood doesn't change the fact that I've been their only parent for their entire lives." Eleanor looked at Henry. "Did you know about this when you invited her here?" "I found out 3 weeks ago. I hired an investigator to locate Annalise because I wanted to talk to her. The investigator discovered the children's existence. And you're certain they're yours?" Henry's jaw tightened. "Look at them, Mother. Look at their eyes, their faces. There's no question." Eleanor did look, really look, at her grandchildren for the first time. Annalise watched emotions flicker across the older woman's face, shock giving way to something else, something almost hungry. "They have the Cole features," Eleanor murmured. "The boy especially. He looks like Henry did at that age." "His name is Malik," Annalise said firmly, "and her name is Serenity. They're people, Eleanor, not just Cole features." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Don't lecture me about my own grandchildren. Grandchildren you stole from this family. I didn't steal anything. I protected them." "From what? From their heritage? From opportunities you could never provide? From the life they deserved? from being turned into chess pieces in your social games. Annalise's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm, from learning that love is conditional and people are disposable, from becoming like... She stopped herself, but Eleanor finished the sentence anyway. Like Henry? Is that what you were going to say, that you didn't want them to become like their own father? The silence that followed was deafening. Henry's face had gone carefully blank, but Annalise could see the wound her almost words had inflicted. The twins were pressed against each other now, Serenity's lip trembling. "I think," Annalise said quietly, "we should continue this conversation somewhere the children can't hear it." "Agreed," Henry said, his voice tight. He crouched down to the twins' level. "Serenity, Malik, would you like to go with your uncle to the kitchen? The caterers have all sorts of fancy desserts, and I'm sure they'd let you try some." Serenity's face brightened at the mention of desserts, but Malik was more hesitant. "Are you and Mama going to fight?" he asked directly. "We're going to talk," Henry corrected gently. "Adults sometimes need to have difficult conversations, but everything is going to be okay." It was the right thing to say, even if Annalise wasn't sure it was true. Daniel collected the twins and led them out, though both children kept looking back at their mother. Serenity waved, trying to be brave. Malik watched Henry with those analytical eyes, already trying to figure out what kind of man his father was. When they were alone, Eleanor turned on Annalise with renewed fury. "You have no right to keep these children from their family," Eleanor began. "No right to raise them in poverty when they should have every advantage." "They're not in poverty," Annalise interrupted. "They have a home, food, clothes, an excellent education, and a mother who loves them unconditionally. That's more than I ever got in this house." "How dare you compare—" "Enough." Henry's single word cut through his mother's tirade. "Both of you, stop." He moved to the window, his back to both women, his shoulders tense. "Mother, Annalise is right about some things. The way you treated her during our marriage was wrong. The way I treated her was worse. I can't blame her for running, for wanting to protect our children from this family. Henry, I'm not finished." He turned to face them. "But Annalise, you're also wrong. Whatever my faults, and they're considerable, I had a right to know I had children. You took that choice away from me. You took away 5 years I can never get back." His voice cracked on the last words, and Annalise felt her own throat tighten. "You told me children were expensive distractions," she said quietly. "You said love was inefficient. You were having an affair with Victoria. What was I supposed to think? That you'd suddenly want to be a father?" "I don't know what I would have wanted back then," Henry admitted, "but I deserved the chance to figure it out. They deserved to have a father, even if I would have been terrible at it." "And now?" Eleanor asked sharply. "Now that you know about them, what do you intend to do?" Henry looked at his mother, then at Annalise, and for once his legendary composure was nowhere to be found. "I don't know," he said. "I genuinely don't know. All I know is that I have a son and daughter who don't know me, who have every reason to never want to know me, and somehow I have to find a way to be part of their lives without destroying the life Annalise has built for them." "You want custody," Eleanor stated. "Joint custody at minimum. I want—" Henry stopped, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration that was shockingly uncharacteristic. "I want to do whatever is best for them. I just don't know what that is yet." Annalise felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the calculated businessman she'd expected. This was someone genuinely lost, genuinely hurting, genuinely trying to figure out how to be a father to children he'd just discovered existed. It didn't erase 7 years of absence. It didn't fix the broken marriage or the pain he'd caused. But it was something. "Then maybe," she said slowly, "we figure it out together. Not you taking them, not me hiding them, but both of us actually putting Serenity and Malik first instead of our own hurt and anger." Eleanor made a sound of disgust. "How touching. The woman who stole 5 years from this family now wants to negotiate. Mother, Henry's voice was steel. Leave, now. This is between Annalise and me. These are my grandchildren, who you just met, who you immediately tried to claim like property. Annalise is right. That's exactly the kind of thing she was protecting them from. So leave, and let me try to fix what I broke 7 years ago. Eleanor's face flushed with fury, but she recognized the tone in her son's voice. She swept from the room with icy dignity, but not before throwing one last look at Annalise that promised this conversation was far from over. When they were alone, Henry and Annalise stood on opposite sides of the library, 7 years of silence and pain between them. "I'm sorry," Henry said finally, "for all of it, for how I treated you during our marriage, for making you feel like you had to run, for not being the kind of man you could trust with our children." Annalise's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm sorry too, for not telling you, for not giving you a chance, for assuming you'd be a terrible father just because you were a terrible husband." "I was a terrible husband," he acknowledged, "and I'll probably be a terrible father at first, but I want to try, if you'll let me." Before Annalise could answer, Serenity's voice called from down the hallway. "Mama, Henry, you have to see this chocolate fountain. Uncle Daniel is letting us try strawberries." The moment broke, and despite everything, the pain, the uncertainty, the impossible complexity of their situation, both Annalise and Henry smiled slightly. "We should probably supervise before they eat too much chocolate," Annalise said. "Probably," Henry agreed. They walked side by side toward the kitchen, not quite together but not quite separate either, both of them trying to navigate a future neither had planned for. Around 8 o'clock, just as the twins were starting to yawn despite the excitement, there was a knock on the kitchen door. One of the catering staff stood there looking apologetic. "Mr. Cole, I'm sorry to interrupt, but several of the guests are asking to meet your children, particularly the board members. They're very curious about—" "Tell them no," Henry said immediately. "The children are not on display." "But sir," Mr. Montgomery specifically said, "I don't care what anyone says. My children are not making appearances at a party like their entertainment." Annalise felt something shift in her chest. 7 years ago, Henry would have absolutely trotted them out to show them off, to use them for strategic advantage. But he was protecting them now, putting their comfort ahead of business considerations. "Actually," she said slowly, "it might be good for Serenity and Malik to meet a few people. On their terms, when they're ready. Not because they have to, but because they might want to." "I want to see the party," Serenity announced, perking up despite her obvious tiredness. "Is it fancy? Are there flowers?" "Very fancy," Henry confirmed. "And yes, lots of flowers. But only if you want to go down there. If you'd rather stay up here, that's fine too. Can we see it for just a little bit?" Malik asked. "Then come back up if we don't like it." "Of course." So they made their way downstairs, Henry carrying Serenity when her legs got tired halfway down the grand staircase. Malik held his mother's hand tightly, suddenly shy in the face of all the strangers. The ballroom fell almost completely silent when they appeared in the doorway. 200 of San Francisco's wealthiest, most powerful people turned to stare at Henry Cole, standing with a small girl in his arms and a small boy pressed against his leg, looking every inch the protective father despite having met them only hours ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henry said, his voice carrying across the room with the authority of someone used to commanding attention, "I'd like to introduce you to my children. This is Serenity and this is Malik. They're 5 years old, they're brilliant and kind, and they are absolutely not here for business discussions or society gossip." He looked pointedly at Patricia Montgomery as he said this last part. They wanted to see the party because Serenity heard there was a chocolate fountain, which apparently is the most exciting thing in the world when you're 5. "So please feel free to admire my children from a distance, but don't crowd them, Don't bombard them with questions, and definitely don't bring up company succession planning." There was nervous laughter at this, and some of the tension in the room eased. Serenity waved enthusiastically from Henry's arms. "Hi, everybody. Wow, you're all so fancy." More laughter, this time genuine and warm. Serenity's natural charm was already working its magic. Malik stayed partially hidden behind his mother, but his eyes were taking in everything: the elaborate decorations, the string quartet playing in the corner, the ice sculpture in the shape of the Cole Technologies logo. "Can I see the fountain now?" Serenity asked Henry. "Absolutely." He carried her across the ballroom toward the dessert table, and people parted before him like water. Annalise followed with Malik, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes tracking their movement. She heard the whispers starting again. "He's holding her like he's been doing it for years. Did you see how protective he was?" "That's not the Henry Cole I know. The children are adorable. They look exactly like him. I heard the mother raised them completely alone. Build a business while doing it. Maybe she's not as unsuitable as Eleanor always claimed." Eleanor had followed them down and was moving through the crowd with considerably more grace than Annalise could muster, accepting congratulations on her grandchildren with surprising warmth. "Yes, they are remarkable," Eleanor was saying to one cluster of her society friends. "And before you ask, yes, I'm aware I made terrible mistakes, but I'm hoping to do better going forward." The honesty seemed to stun her audience into silence. The visit to the party lasted exactly 23 minutes before Malik started to fade, leaning heavily against his mother's leg while trying to stay awake. "I think it's bedtime for someone," Annalise said softly, running her fingers through his hair. "Not tired," Malik mumbled, his eyes already half closed. "Of course not," Henry said with a slight smile. "You're just resting your eyes while standing up. I used to do that all the time at your age." "Really?" Malik looked up at his father with interest. "Really? Especially during boring dinner parties my parents made me attend. I'd stand perfectly still and rest my eyes and pretend I was paying attention." Despite his exhaustion, Malik smiled at this. "Come on, buddy," Henry said, crouching down. "Let's get you to a comfortable place to rest those eyes properly." Before Annalise could offer to carry him, Henry had scooped Malik up in his arms. The boy's head settled naturally against Henry's shoulder, his small body going limp with the complete trust of a child who feels safe. Henry stood carefully, one hand supporting Malik's back, the other under his legs. His expression as he looked down at his son was something Annalise had never seen before. Pure, unguarded love mixed with wonder and heartbreak for all the moments like this he'd missed. "Where should we take them?" he asked quietly. "I have guest rooms prepared, or you might prefer to go back to your hotel." "The guest rooms are fine," Annalise decided. "It's late, and they're already comfortable here." Serenity had fallen asleep too, still in Henry's arms from earlier, now being carried by her Uncle Daniel. The two men carried the sleeping children upstairs while Eleanor directed them to the best guest suite. Actually a two-bedroom suite with a shared bathroom, decorated in soft blues and greys. They laid the children on the beds, still in their fancy clothes. Annalise removed their shoes and tucked blankets around them, muscle memory from 5 years of bedtime routines. Henry stood watching from the doorway, his hands in his pockets, looking lost. "You can come closer," Annalise said softly. "They're asleep. They won't know." He moved to stand beside her, looking down at Malik sleeping peacefully. "I've missed this," he said, his voice rough. "I've missed every bedtime, every morning wake-up, every sick day and scared night and ordinary moment. 5 years of this, and I didn't even know it existed." "You can't get those years back," Annalise said gently. "But you can have the years going forward if you don't waste them. I won't. I promise." The next morning, Annalise's brother Daniel drove them back to their hotel, where they'd planned to stay for one more day before returning to Seattle. The twins were full of chatter about the party, the fancy house, and their new father who lived in a palace. Annalise's phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Thank you for last night, for giving me a chance. Can I see them again before you leave?" She stared at the message, considering. They'd agreed to go slow, but the twins had clearly enjoyed meeting him, and honestly, Henry had been better with them than she'd expected. Before she could respond, Serenity grabbed the phone. "Can we invite Henry to help decorate our Christmas tree?" she asked. "We're getting one today, remember?" They'd planned to pick up a small tree from a lot near their Seattle apartment when they got home, making it part of their Sunday tradition. But Serenity's eyes were so hopeful, and the idea of including Henry in something so normal and domestic had a certain appeal. "I think that's a lovely idea," Annalise said, taking her phone back. She typed, "We're getting a Christmas tree today. Would you like to join us? It won't be fancy, just a small tree from a local lot and decorating in our hotel room, but the kids would enjoy having you there." His response was immediate. "I'll be there. Just tell me when and where." 2 hours later, Henry arrived at their modest hotel near the airport, looking completely out of place in his expensive casual wear. Designer jeans that probably cost more than Annalise's monthly car payment, and a sweater that screamed luxury even without visible logos. The twins were waiting in the lobby and launched themselves at him the moment he walked through the doors. "You came!" Serenity threw her arms around his waist. "Of course I came," Henry said, looking pleased but slightly overwhelmed by the physical affection. "You invited me to help with your Christmas tree." "I wouldn't miss that. Have you decorated a Christmas tree before?" Malik asked. Henry paused. "Not personally, no. We always had professional decorators handle that." "Then you're in for a treat," Daniel said with a grin. "Because we've aunts' siblings have trees decorating down to a science. It involves a lot of arguing about ornament placement and at least one person getting tangled in lights." They piled into 2 cars, Annalise's Honda and Henry's Tesla, and drove to a Christmas tree lot in a middle-class neighborhood. Henry looked around at the modest setup with obvious curiosity, taking in the rows of trees, the hand-painted signs advertising prices, the families browsing while children ran between the rows. "This is very authentic," he said carefully. "This is normal," Annalise corrected with amusement. "This is what regular families do during the holidays." Serenity grabbed Henry's hand and pulled him toward the trees. "We have to find the perfect one. Not too tall because Mama's apartment has short ceilings, but not too small because we need room for lots of ornaments." For the next 30 minutes, Annalise watched Henry be led around the tree lot by her daughter, seriously considering each tree Serenity showed him, offering opinions when asked, and looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Malik stayed close to his mother, still warming up to this new person in their lives, but watching his father with intense interest. "What do you think of him?" Annalise asked her son quietly. "He's trying hard," Malik observed. "Serenity already loves him, but Serenity loves everybody. I need more time to decide." "That's fair," Annalise said, hugging him close. "You take all the time you need." They finally selected a 6-foot Douglas fir that Serenity declared absolutely perfect. Henry insisted on paying for it, along with a new tree stand when he learned theirs was back in Seattle. Getting the tree back to the hotel and up to their room was an adventure involving much laughter, some frustrated grunting, and Henry getting sap all over his expensive sweater. "I think this is ruined," he said, looking down at the sticky residue. "Welcome to real Christmas tree ownership," Daniel said cheerfully. "The sap is inevitable. Just be grateful you're not the one who got poked in the eye by a branch." "That was one time," Annalise protested. "And I was 12. The casual family banter seemed to fascinate Henry. He watched them interact with the focus of someone studying a foreign culture, trying to understand the patterns and rhythms of a real family dynamic. Malik's direct question, "Why didn't you want us?" Once the tree was set up in their hotel room, looking slightly absurd in the generic corporate space, but filling it with the scent of pine. They pulled out the box of ornaments Annalise always travelled with during the holidays. They were simple decorations, nothing expensive or fancy. Some were handmade by the twins in preschool, others were discount store finds. Each one had a story, a memory attached to it. Serenity was hanging ornaments with abandon, chattering constantly about each one. But Malik had grown quiet, holding a small wooden reindeer and not hanging it up. Henry noticed. "Something wrong with that one?" "No." Malik turned the ornament over in his hands. "I was just thinking, about what?" Malik looked up at his father with those two old eyes. "Why didn't you want us?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the cheerful tree decorating session. Serenity stopped mid-reach for an ornament. Uncle Daniel paused in untangling a string of lights. Annalise's breath caught in her throat. Henry set down the ornament he'd been holding and lowered himself to Malik's eye level, his expression serious and open. "That's an important question," he said quietly, "and you deserve an honest answer." He glanced at Annalise, who nodded slightly. This conversation needed to happen. "When your mother and I were married," Henry began carefully, "I was a different person. I thought I knew what I wanted from life: money, success, power, respect. I thought children would distract from those goals, would make my life more complicated. So I told your mother I didn't want kids." "But you didn't know about us," Malik said. "If you had known, would you have wanted us?" Henry's face tightened with pain. "I honestly don't know. The man I was back then might not have. And that's something I have to live with, knowing that I was so focused on the wrong things that I might have rejected, the best things that ever could have happened to me. So you didn't want us because we would be inconvenient?" Malik's voice was steady, but there was hurt underneath. "I didn't want the idea of children because I was too selfish and stupid to understand what really matters in life. But that was before I met you, before I knew that you're brilliant and thoughtful and you ask hard questions that make me think. Before I knew that your sister is kind and joyful and can light up a room just by being in it." Henry's voice grew rough with emotion. "You asked if I wanted you, the man I was 7 years ago? No, he probably wouldn't have. But the man I am now, the man who's gotten to spend time with you over the past day, I can't imagine a world without you in it. Not wanting to know you feels impossible now." Malik considered this, his small face serious. "Mama says people can change if they really try. Your mama is right about that, and about most other things too. Are you really going to try to be our dad?" "I'm going to try harder than I've tried at anything in my life," Henry promised. "I'm going to mess up sometimes. I'm going to say the wrong thing or not know what to do. But I promise you that I will show up. I will listen. I will love you, even though I'm still learning how to do that properly." Malik studied his father for a long moment, then held out the wooden reindeer. "You can hang this one," he said. "Mama and I made it when I was 3. It was the first ornament I ever made." Henry took the ornament like it was made of precious gems, his hands shaking slightly as he stood and carefully hung it on the tree. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. After that breakthrough moment, the tree decorating continued with lighter energy. Each ornament came with a story that Annalise or the twins shared, sometimes funny, sometimes sweet, all of them glimpses into the life Henry had missed. "This one Serenity made in her first week of kindergarten," Annalise said, holding up a lopsided star covered in glitter. "She was so proud of it she slept with it under her pillow for a week." "It's a special star," Serenity said seriously, "because it was my first school project ever. This one," Malik showed Henry a small photo frame ornament, "has a picture of me and Mama from when I was 2. I had just learned to say I love you, and I said it about 100 times that day." Henry looked at the photo, Annalise younger, tired but smiling, holding a tiny Malik who was grinning at the camera with pure joy. "You look happy," he said to Annalise. "I am. Being their mother is the best thing I've ever done, even when it's hard." They worked together to string the lights, with everyone indeed getting tangled at least once, just as Daniel had predicted. Henry seemed both fascinated and slightly horrified by the chaotic process. "We have people who do this for the company Christmas tree," he said, watching Serenity try to wrap lights around the middle section while standing on a chair. "Where's the fun in that?" Serenity asked. "The messy part is the best part." "I'm beginning to understand that," Henry said, and he actually smiled, not his polished corporate smile, but something genuine and warm. By the time the tree was fully decorated, it looked nothing like the professionally designed Christmas displays at the Cole estate. It was crooked in places, the ornament distribution was uneven, and some of the lights blinked at slightly different rhythms. It was perfect. They stood back to admire their work, the 4 adults and 2 children, and for a moment they looked like a family. "Can we take a picture?" Serenity asked. "With all of us and the tree?" Daniel set up the camera timer on his phone, and they gathered around the tree. Henry stood slightly apart at first, not sure where he belonged, until Malik grabbed his hand and pulled him into the group. The photo captured them all, messy, happy, not quite comfortable with each other yet, but trying. Annalise looked at it on the screen afterward and felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd wanted for her children all along. Not wealth or status or the Cole name, but this: belonging, connection, family in all its imperfect glory. As the afternoon turned to evening, Daniel ordered Chinese food and they ate sitting on the hotel room floor, using the coffee table as a dining surface. Henry looked uncomfortable with the informal setup at first, but the twins' enthusiasm was infectious. "This is how we always eat when we're celebrating something," Serenity explained, showing him how to use chopsticks. "On the floor is more fun than at a table." "Everything is more fun on the floor according to you," Malik pointed out. "Even homework." "Because it is." After dinner, as they were cleaning up, Malik approached Henry with something in his hand, a small ornament box. "This is for you," he said quietly, "for your tree at home." Henry opened it to find a simple glass ball ornament. Inside was a photo of the twins from their last school picture day, both smiling at the camera. "So you can remember us when we're not there," Malik explained. "And so maybe your tree can have at least one ornament with a story." Henry's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at the gift. "Thank you. This means more to me than you know. Will you really come visit us in Seattle?" Serenity asked, suddenly anxious. "Or was this just for one day?" "I'll visit as often as your mother will let me," Henry promised, looking at Annalise. She took a deep breath. This was the moment to set the boundaries, to establish the framework for whatever co-parenting relationship they would build. "How about we start with video calls twice a week?" she suggested, "so the kids can talk to you, show you their drawings and schoolwork, and tell you about their days, and then maybe you could visit Seattle once a month? Stay in a hotel nearby, spend a weekend getting to know them in their own environment." "I can do that," Henry said immediately. "Whatever schedule works for you and for them. And maybe," she added slowly, "in a few months, if everyone's comfortable, they could visit you in San Francisco for a weekend, see the city, spend time at your house, meet the parts of your life that are important to you. I'd like that very much." Serenity was already planned. "Can we see the Golden Gate Bridge, and ride a cable car, and go to that park with all the sea lions?" "All of that and more," Henry promised. As they prepared to say goodbye for the evening, Malik did something unexpected. He walked up to Henry and hugged him. Not a long hug, not a particularly tight one, but a real hug nonetheless. "Thank you for trying," he said simply. Henry wrapped his arms around his son, his eyes squeezed shut, and Annalise saw a tear slide down his cheek. When they finally separated, Serenity insisted on a hug too, throwing herself at Henry with her characteristic enthusiasm. "I think you're going to be a good dad," she declared. "You just need practice." "I think you might be right," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. At the door, Henry paused and looked back at Annalise. "Thank you," he said, "for this. For them. For being willing to let me try." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is just the beginning. The hard part comes when the novelty wears off and you have to deal with tantrums and homework battles and all the unglamorous parts of parenting. I'm ready for that. Or at least I'm ready to try to be ready." After he left, Daniel helped get the overtired twins ready for bed. They were both wound up from the day's excitement, asking 100 questions about when they'd see Henry again, whether he liked them, whether they'd really get to visit San Francisco. When they finally fell asleep, Annalise collapsed on the sofa in the hotel room, emotionally exhausted. "You okay?" her brother asked. "I don't know. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to revert to the Henry I knew during our marriage. But he seems genuinely different. People can change, especially when they're motivated by something important. He's motivated by guilt and what he's missed. What happens when that wears off? Then you deal with it, but give him a chance to prove himself before you assume the worst." Annalise looked at the Christmas tree, slightly crooked and imperfectly decorated, with Henry's fingerprints now literally on some of the ornaments. Seeds of forgiveness had been planted today. Not full forgiveness, that would take time if it came at all. But the possibility of it, the tiny green shoots of maybe, perhaps, we'll see. For now that was enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "I hung the ornament Malik gave me on my tree. It's the only one that matters. Thank you for today. For everything. Sleep well." Attached was a photo of his massive, professionally decorated Christmas tree at the estate. In the center, hung with obvious care, was the simple glass ball with the twins' photo inside. It looked out of place among all the designer ornaments and coordinated color schemes. Annalise smiled and texted back, "Sleep well. The kids are already asking when they can video call you. Tomorrow? If that's not too soon. Tomorrow is fine. 7 p.m. their time. I'll be there." And somehow, Annalise believed he would be. The future was uncertain, the path forward complicated and full of potential pitfalls. But for the first time in 7 years, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they might all find their way to something better than what had been broken, not fixed, not back to the way things were, but something new, built on honesty and effort, and the hope that people really could change when they had good enough reasons. And Serenity and Malik were the best reasons in the world. 6 months had transformed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June, and Annalise stood in the doorway of her learning center's main classroom, watching something she never thought she'd see. Henry Cole, billionaire CEO, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a struggling third grader, patiently explaining fractions using pizza slices cut from construction paper. "So if I eat 3 slices out of 8, the boy said slowly, "that's 3/8 of the pizza?" "Exactly." Henry's face lit up with genuine pride. "You've got it, David. See? You're not bad at math. You just needed someone to explain it in a way that made sense to you." The boy beamed, and Annalise felt her heart do that complicated thing it had been doing lately whenever she watched Henry with children, not just his own, but any child who needed help. It had started 2 months ago, when Henry had visited Seattle for his regular weekend with the twins. He'd picked them up from the learning center and had seen Annalise working with a student who was on the verge of tears over his math homework. "I'm just stupid," the kid had said. "My teacher says I don't try hard enough, but I do try. I just don't get it." Henry had asked if he could help. Annalise had been skeptical. What did a tech CEO know about teaching struggling learners? But she'd been desperate and short-staffed, so she'd said yes. 45 minutes later, the student had not only understood the concept, but had completed his entire homework assignment with the confidence that had been missing before. "How did you do that?" Annalise had asked after the student left. "I was that kid once," Henry had admitted quietly. "Everyone assumed I was naturally brilliant because I'm a Cole, but I struggled terribly with certain subjects. I just had access to expensive tutors who knew how to teach my learning style. Every kid deserves that, not just rich ones." Now, 2 months later, Henry flew to Seattle every Tuesday, rearranging his entire schedule, delegating responsibilities, conducting meetings via video call, just so he could volunteer at Second Chance's Learning Center for 3 hours before spending the evening with his children. He'd become unexpectedly good at it, patient in a way Annalise had never seen during their marriage, genuinely invested in each student's success. The kids loved him because he treated them with respect, never talked down to them, and had a gift for making complex concepts accessible. "Mr. Henry," a girl named Sophie ran up to him as David packed up his materials. "I got a B on my spelling test. You said I could do it, and I did." "That's fantastic, Sophie." Henry offered her a high five. "I told you that practicing a little bit every day would make a difference. You worked hard for that grade. You should be proud." Watching him, Annalise had to acknowledge something she'd been trying not to think about. Henry really had changed. This wasn't strategic positioning or public relations. This was a genuine transformation, the kind that came from doing difficult internal work and choosing to be better than you were before. The CO parenting schedule they'd established had evolved organically over the months, finding a rhythm that worked for everyone. Henry video called the twins every Monday, Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock sharp. He never missed a call, never rescheduled, never treated it as optional. The kids would settle in front of the laptop, competing to tell him about their days first. "I learned about butterflies in science," Serenity would announce. "I finished the entire chapter book you sent me," Malik would add. Henry listened to everything with complete attention, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from previous conversations. He'd become fluent in the minutiae of their lives, their teachers' names, their friends' dramas, their favorite lunch items in the cafeteria. He visited Seattle twice a month, staying at a modest hotel near their apartment rather than some luxury property downtown. He'd learned the neighborhood, knew which coffee shop had the best hot chocolate for the kids, which park had the good swings, which pizza place delivered fastest. During his visits, he didn't try to overwhelm them with expensive outings or gifts. Instead, he showed up for ordinary moments, helping with homework, playing board games, reading bedtime stories. He'd mastered Serenity's favorite bedtime book and could do all the character voices. He'd learned to braid hair after Serenity had asked if he could do her ponytail like Mama did. The twins had visited San Francisco 3 times now, staying at the estate in rooms Henry had specifically designed for them, not over the top or trying too hard, but comfortable and filled with things they actually liked. Books for Malik, art supplies for Serenity, a shared play space where they could just be kids. Eleanor had been present during each visit, and the transformation in her was perhaps even more remarkable than Henry's. She'd actually gotten down on the floor to play with dolls with Serenity. She'd taken Malik to the California Academy of Sciences and spent 3 hours letting him examine every exhibit. She'd learned to bake cookies with them, even though she'd never baked anything in her life before. "Your grandmother asked me to teach her how to make chocolate chip cookies," Daniel had reported after Eleanor had called him for the recipe. Eleanor Cole, on the phone, asking about cookie recipes. I thought I was hallucinating, but the most surprising development had been Victoria Laurent's quiet exit from Henry's life. She'd taken a position at a competing firm 2 months ago, a lateral move that had shocked the business community. Rumors suggested Henry had quietly helped facilitate the transition, recognizing that they needed professional distance. The CO parenting arrangement wasn't perfect. There had been bumps, a misunderstanding about Christmas plans, a disagreement about whether Malik was old enough for a more challenging science camp, a few moments when old patterns had threatened to resurface. But they'd worked through everything by actually communicating, by putting the children first, by remembering that they were on the same team now, even if they weren't together. Eleanor had requested a video call with Annalise about a month into the new arrangement, just the two of them, no Henry, no children. Annalise had been nervous, expecting criticism or demands. Instead, Eleanor had been almost humble. "I wanted to apologize properly," Eleanor had said, "not just for what I said the night we met the children, but for everything during your marriage. I was cruel to you, Annalise, deliberately, systematically cruel. And I'm sorry." "Thank you," Annalise had managed, too surprised to say much else. "I've been in therapy," Eleanor had continued, which was somehow even more shocking than the apology. "Working on understanding why I behaved the way I did, why I valued control and image over kindness and genuine connection. My therapist says I have trust issues stemming from my own mother's coldness, but that doesn't excuse how I treated you." "No, it doesn't," Annalise had agreed. "But I appreciate you acknowledging it. I can't undo the past, but I'm hoping I can be better in the future. For Serenity and Malik, yes, but also because I genuinely want to make amends with you. You gave my son the greatest gifts he's ever received, and I tried to make you feel like you weren't worthy of him. The truth is, he was never worthy of you." Now, Eleanor called Annalise once a week, not to discuss the children, though they came up, but just to talk. They'd developed an unlikely friendship, bonding over their shared confusion about how to navigate this new family dynamic. Eleanor had even invited Annalise to join her for lunch during their last San Francisco visit, just the two of them, leaving the kids with Henry. "I never had female friends," Eleanor had admitted over salad. "I viewed other women as competition, or beneath me, or threats. I'm trying to learn how to actually connect with people. It's harder than running a board meeting. Relationships usually are," Annalise had said. They'd talked about parenthood, about Eleanor's regrets over how she'd raised Henry, about Annalise's fears of messing up her children despite her best intentions. It had been strange and awkward and surprisingly healing. One Sunday afternoon, when Henry had dropped the kids back at Annalise's apartment after a weekend visit, he'd asked if they could talk privately for a few minutes. They'd sat in her small living room, Henry looking slightly out of place on her second-hand sofa, while the twins played in their bedroom. "I wanted to tell you something," he'd begun. "I've been in intensive therapy for the past 6 months, 3 times a week, working with a specialist who focuses on attachment issues and emotional availability. That's good, Henry. It's been brutal," he'd admitted with a slight laugh. "Harder than any business negotiation I've ever done. My therapist makes me actually feel things instead of analyzing them. It's extremely uncomfortable, but necessary, essential. I'm learning that everything I thought made me strong, the emotional control, the strategic thinking, the ability to compartmentalize, was actually making me hollow. I built walls so high that nothing could get in. Not love, not connection, not genuine human feeling." He'd looked at her directly then, his eyes more open than she'd ever seen them. "I'm learning why I treated you the way I did during our marriage, why I sabotaged the one real relationship I'd ever had. Why did I told myself love was inefficient when really I was just terrified of being vulnerable? And what are you learning? That I was taught from childhood that feelings were weaknesses, that vulnerability was dangerous, that the only thing that mattered was achievement and success and maintaining the cold image. My father modeled emotional unavailability, my mother modeled conditional love, and I absorbed all of it." His voice had grown thick with emotion. "I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to understand so I can be different, so I don't pass that damage on to Serenity and Malik. So they grow up knowing that it's okay to feel things, to be vulnerable, to need other people. You're doing better with them than you think, Annalise had said softly. They adore you. And not because of the things you buy them or the places you take them, because you show up, because you listen, because you let them see that you're trying. I'm trying to be the kind of father they deserve, the kind of man I should have been for you. The moment that had really shown Annalise how much Henry had changed came at a little league game. Malik had joined a t-ball team, and Henry had rearranged his entire schedule to fly to Seattle for the first game. He'd arrived at the field in jeans and a mariner's cap, blending in with the other parents in a way that would have been unthinkable during their marriage. Malik had been nervous. It was his first time playing organized sports, and he was anxious about messing up in front of everyone. Before the game, he'd stood frozen at home plate, the bat trembling in his small hands. Henry had walked out onto the field, not supposed to, technically, but no one stopped him, and knelt down beside his son. Annalise had been close enough to hear their conversation. "I'm scared I'll miss," Malik had whispered. "You might," Henry had said honestly. "Most kids miss the first few times they try. That's part of learning, but everyone will laugh. Then they'll be rude, and that will say something about them, not about you. But you know what? I'll be proud of you whether you hit the ball or not, because you're brave enough to try something new even though it scares you. That takes more courage than hitting a ball." Malik had looked up at his father with those serious eyes. "Really, really, I'm proud of you for being here, for putting on that uniform, for standing at this plate. Everything else is just a bonus." Malik nodded, took a deep breath, and positioned himself. He'd missed the first pitch, and the second. On the third, he'd made contact, not a great hit, just a weak grounder, but he'd hit it. The crowd cheered. Serenity had screamed encouragement from the stands, and Henry had stood on the sidelines with tears running down his face, not bothering to hide them, watching his son run to first base with a huge grin. After the game, which their team lost by quite a lot, Henry had taken Malik for ice cream and spent an hour talking about the game, finding things Malik had done well, making him feel like a champion, even though he'd only gotten on base once. Annalise had watched them through the ice cream shop window, father and son, heads bent together over sundaes, Malik gesticulating enthusiastically while Henry listened with complete attention, and felt something shift in her heart. This was what she'd wanted for her children all along. Not wealth or status, but this. A father who showed up, who cared, who made them feel valued for who they were rather than what they achieved. 3 weeks after the baseball game, during one of Henry's regular visits to Seattle, he asked Annalise if they could have dinner together, just the two of them, without the children. "Is this about a CO parenting issue?" she'd asked, immediately going into problem-solving mode. "No, this is about us, or potentially about us. If there could be an us." Her heart had skipped a beat. "Henry, please, just dinner. Let me say what I need to say, and then if you tell me to never bring it up again, I won't." So they'd left the twins with Daniel and gone to a quiet restaurant in Annalise's neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a local place with good food and reasonable prices. Henry had looked nervous, which was so unlike him that it had made Annalise nervous too. "I've been thinking a lot about the past 6 months," he'd begun once they'd ordered. "About how much has changed. About how much I've changed, or at least how much I'm trying to change." "You have changed," Annalise had confirmed. "Everyone can see it. I hope so, because I'm trying to become the kind of man who deserves a second chance, not just with Serenity and Malik, but with you." Her breath had caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I made the biggest mistake of my life when I lost you. I'm saying that I've spent 7 years regretting how I treated you, how I threw away something real for something hollow. I'm saying that watching you with our children, seeing the incredible woman you've become, has made me realize that I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love you properly back then." He'd reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm not asking you to pretend I didn't hurt you terribly. I'm just asking if there's any possibility, any chance at all, that someday you might be willing to see if we could try again. Differently this time. Better this time. Before we continue with Annalise's response, I need to ask you something. Have you ever given someone a second chance? Have you ever been the one asking for another opportunity to get it right? This story is about more than just wealth and power. It's about whether people can truly change, whether broken things can be rebuilt, whether love gets second chances. Drop a comment and tell us what you think Annalise should do. And if you've been following this journey from the beginning, if you're invested in seeing how this family's story unfolds, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Mr. Steele Rich. We tell stories that matter, stories about real people navigating impossible choices. Now, let's hear what Annalise decides. Annalise had looked at Henry, really looked at him, seeing both the man who'd broken her heart 7 years ago and the man who'd spent the last 6 months proving he could be better. "I appreciate your honesty," she'd said slowly, "and I won't lie and say I haven't noticed the changes in you. You're not the same person I married. You're not even the same person you were 6 months ago. But," Henry had prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, "but I'm not the same person either. I'm not that naive 25-year-old who believes in fairy tales anymore. I've been burned, Henry, badly, and I have 2 children to think about now. If we tried this and it didn't work, it wouldn't just be my heart breaking. It would affect Serenity and Malik too. I know. That's why I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, to prove that this isn't just guilt or nostalgia or some midlife crisis. To show you that I'm serious about being different, about being better, about actually earning your trust instead of demanding it." Annalise had taken a sip of her water, buying time to organize her thoughts. "Ask me again in 6 months," she'd said finally. 6 months? 6 months. Keep doing what you're doing, showing up for the kids, volunteering at the center, working on yourself in therapy. Prove that this isn't temporary. Prove that when the novelty wears off and it gets hard, you don't revert to old patterns. And in 6 months, ask me again." Henry nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will do that. And in the meantime, we continue as we are. XO parents, friends, maybe, eventually, but nothing more. I need that boundary to protect myself and the kids. I understand, and I respect that." He'd smiled then, genuine and warm. 6 months isn't that long. And honestly, Annalise, I'd wait 6 years if that's what it took. You're worth waiting for. You always were. That had been 3 months ago. Now, standing in the doorway of her learning center watching Henry work with students, Annalise thought about time and change and second chances. She thought about the person she'd been 7 years ago, broken, running, convinced she'd never trust anyone again. She thought about the person she'd become, strong, successful, capable of building something meaningful from nothing. She thought about Henry 7 years ago, cold, calculating, treating people like assets. And Henry now, warm, present, genuinely trying to be better than he'd been. She thought about Serenity and Malik, who had started this journey with no father and now had one who showed up consistently, who loved them genuinely, who was learning to be the dad they deserved. She thought about Eleanor, transformed from a cold society matriarch into a grandmother who baked cookies and played with dolls and apologized for her mistakes. She thought about broken things and whether they could be fixed, or if maybe they needed to stay broken so something new could be built from the pieces. Henry finished with his student and looked up, catching her watching him. He smiled, not the polished corporate smile, but the real one that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and walked over. "Hey, didn't know you were there. How long have you been watching?" "Long enough to see you explain fractions with pizza. That was clever. I'm learning that kids understand better when you relate abstract concepts to things they care about. Usually food. He paused. The kids are with your brother tonight, right? For their movie night? Yes. Why? I was thinking maybe we could grab dinner. Nothing fancy, nothing formal, just dinner. Annalise studied his face. 3 months since she'd told him to wait 6 months. He hadn't pushed, hadn't asked again, had simply continued showing up and being consistent and proving through actions rather than words that he meant what he said. Just dinner? She asked. Just dinner. 2 CO parents discussing their children's summer plans. Maybe talking about that science camp Malik wants to attend. Maybe mentioning that Serenity needs new cleats for soccer. That sounds suspiciously like you're trying to make it sound boring, so I'll say yes. Is it working? Despite herself, Annalise laughed. Maybe a little. They went to the same neighborhood restaurant where they'd had their serious conversation 3 months ago. But this time, the conversation was lighter, easier. They talked about the kids, yes, but also about their lives, their work, their hopes for the future. Henry told her about a new initiative at Cole Technologies to provide free technology training to underserved communities. Inspired, he said, by watching her work at Second Chances Learning. Annalise told him about her plans to expand the center, maybe open a second location, possibly develop an online curriculum for families who couldn't afford in-person tutoring. They talked about books they'd read, movies they'd seen, the small, ordinary details of life that they'd never shared during their marriage, because they'd been too busy performing their roles to actually know each other. At some point during the evening, Annalise realized she was having fun, not just tolerating Henry's presence or managing their CO parenting relationship, but actually enjoying being with him. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. After dinner, Henry walked her to her car, parked on the street outside the restaurant, still the same old Honda she'd been driving for years. You know I could buy you a new car, he said, not for the first time. Something safer, more reliable, and I keep telling you that this car works fine. I don't need you to buy me things, Henry. I know, but I want to. Not because I think you can't take care of yourself, but because I want to contribute to making your life easier. You contribute by showing up for your children. That's what matters. He nodded, accepting this. Then 3 more months. What? Until I can ask you again. About trying again. It's been 3 months since you told me to wait 6, which means 3 more months and I get to make my case properly. Annalise felt her heart skip. You're counting? Every day, he admitted. Not because I'm impatient, but because I want to make sure I use this time well. To keep proving I've changed. To keep showing up, to keep being the man you and the kids deserve. She looked at him in the streetlight, this man who was both familiar and completely new. The man who'd broken her heart and was trying so hard to earn a place in it again. Ask me now, she heard herself say. Henry's eyes went wide. What? Ask me now. Not in 3 months. Now. Annalise, I don't want to rush you. You're not. I've had 7 years and 6 months to think about this, to watch you change, to see if it's real or just temporary. And I think it's real. She took a breath, her next words the scariest she'd ever said. I'm not ready to call this a relationship. I'm not ready to jump into anything serious. But I'm willing to try dating you. Real dating. Where we get to know each other as the people we are now instead of who we were 7 years ago. Where we take it slow and see if there's something real underneath all this history. Henry looked like he might cry. Really, you mean it? I mean it. But Henry, I need you to understand something. If we do this and it doesn't work out, it can't affect your relationship with the kids. They come first. Always, always, he agreed immediately. I promise you, no matter what happens between us, I will always be there for Serenity and Malik. That doesn't change. Then yes. Let's try. Slowly, carefully. With our eyes wide open this time, Henry stepped closer, and for a moment, Annalise thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand, just held it gently in his, and looked at her with more emotion than she'd ever seen from him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a second chance I don't deserve, for being brave enough to risk your heart again, for being the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." "Don't thank me yet," Annalise said with a slight smile. "You haven't experienced me as a girlfriend in the real world. I'm bossy and stubborn, and I will absolutely call you out when you're being ridiculous. I'm counting on it. That's what I need. Someone who sees me clearly and loves me anyway, or might love me eventually. I'm willing to earn it." They stood there for another moment, hands linked, both of them knowing this was a beginning rather than an ending. 7 years ago, their relationship had been built on infatuation and fantasy and completely unrealistic expectations. This time, it would be built on honesty and effort and the hard-won wisdom that comes from making mistakes and choosing to learn from them. This time, they knew exactly who they were and what they were getting into. This time, they had 2 beautiful children watching and learning what love and commitment and second chances really looked like. As Annalise drove home that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From heartbreak to strength, from running away to standing her ground, from protecting her children to allowing their father into their lives. She thought about the Christmas tree they decorated together 6 months ago, crooked and imperfect and beautiful. She thought about second chances and whether broken things could truly be fixed, or if they simply became new things, different but maybe better. Her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Thank you for tonight, for taking a chance on me. I promise not to waste it. Sweet dreams." She smiled and typed back, "Don't make promises you can't keep. Just show up and be genuine. That's all I need. I can do that. I will do that. Every single day." Annalise pulled into her apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment before going inside. 7 years ago, she'd driven away from San Francisco broken and alone and pregnant, believing her capacity for love had been destroyed. Now she was driving home to her children, her successful business, and the possibility, just the possibility, of something real with the man who'd once shattered her heart. Life was strange, painful and beautiful and unpredictable. People could change, families could be rebuilt, second chances could turn into new beginnings. She walked into her apartment where her brother was watching TV, the twins already asleep in their beds. "How was dinner?" he asked. "Complicated," Annalise admitted. "But good, really good. You're glowing. I take it you gave him a shot?" "I'm giving us a shot. A careful, slow, eyes wide open shot at seeing if we can build something better than what we had before." Her brother hugged her. "I'm proud of you, Annie, for being strong enough to protect yourself and brave enough to try again. That takes guts." Later, after checking on the peacefully sleeping twins, Annalise stood by their beds and whispered a promise. "Whatever happens with your father and me, you two are loved, completely, unconditionally, forever. That will never change. You are my greatest accomplishment, my greatest joy, my greatest love, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know your worth isn't tied to what you achieve or who you become. You're enough, exactly as you are." Serenity stirred in her sleep, smiling. Malik's hand curled around his stuffed animal, and Annalise felt, for perhaps the first time since leaving San Francisco 7 years ago, complete peace. The future was uncertain. The path forward would have challenges. There were no guarantees that trying again with Henry would work out. But she'd learned something important over the past 7 years. She was strong enough to handle whatever came. She'd survived heartbreak and rebuilt her life. She'd raised 2 incredible children alone. She'd built a business from nothing. She'd learned to trust her own judgment and stand up for what she believed in. Whatever happened next, she would be okay, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be better than okay. maybe she'd be happy. The kind of happiness that came not from fairy tales and perfect moments, but from real connection and genuine effort, and choosing each day to be brave enough to try. That was the kind of love worth having, the kind worth waiting for, the kind worth fighting for. And as Annalise finally climbed into her own bed, she felt gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, the pain that had made her stronger, the mistakes that had taught her wisdom, the heartbreak that had shown her what real love should look like. Second chances weren't about going back to what was. They were about moving forward to what could be. And for the first time in 7 years, Annalise was ready to move forward. With hope, with wisdom, with her heart cautiously, carefully open, ready for whatever came next. Thank you for joining us on Annalise and Henry's journey. If this story touched you, if it made you think about second chances and forgiveness and what it really means to change, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories for more stories about love, wealth, power, and the complicated choices that define us. Drop a comment and tell us, do you believe people can truly change? Do you believe in second chances? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone or yourself another chance to get it right.